Chapter 406. In the back garden of the half-elven palace, a clear river flowed slowly. This was a tributary of the Crystal River, but it was a man-made tributary. The main stream of the Crystal River was actually quite a distance away from Silver Moon City, but how could the half-elves let this mother river pass by the capital? That was why this tributary of the Crystal River was forcefully led into Silver Moon City and reached the back garden of the palace. 2 rows of tall sycamore trees had been transplanted along the river bank. It was now late autumn, and the trees were golden yellow. The half-withered leaves swirled into the river, drifting away with the waves. The colorful sycamore forest set off the greenish-gray stone walls of the palace, depicting the beautiful scenery of autumn. The afternoon sun was warm and pleasant. Colin had his hands behind his head, lying lazily on the grassy slope of the hill. Beside him, Queen Aisha was sitting cross-legged on the grass. Her flawless white palace dress outlined her enchanting female curves. Her pure beauty and mature gentleness combined to form a graceful and wise noble aura. Her pure blue eyes stared unblinkingly at Sylph, who was in her arms. Unfortunately, the little girl kept twisting her body, trying to break free from her mother's embrace. Colin turned his head and looked at his stubborn daughter. He smiled and said, "Put her down. Doesn't she already know how to crawl?" Aisha glared at Colin flirtatiously and said, "How can you let a 1-month-old child crawl all over the ground?" Colin laughed and advised, "Our daughter was born extraordinary. How can you compare her to an ordinary child?" To be honest, even though Sylph was only 1 month old, she was developing very quickly. She almost had the body of an ordinary 6-month-old child. If Aisha was not paying attention, the little girl would crawl all over the ground and disappear. Seeing that Aisha was still unwilling to let go, Colin smiled and took his daughter. He placed her on his stomach and formed a circle with his hands, letting the little girl crawl on his upper body. The little girl got what she wanted. She opened her toothless mouth and laughed happily. Looking at Sylph's big ruby-like eyes, and feeling the touch of her delicate little hands and feet crawling all over his body, Colin only felt that the worries and troubles in his heart had disappeared without a trace at this moment. Unfortunately, this peace was quickly interrupted by a series of hurried footsteps. Teacher, quick, come and see the amusement park I designed for Sylph." Colin turned around and saw Princess Judy in a bright yellow pleated dress, skipping towards him. Behind her was Prince Harrison, who was trying his best to maintain his poise and elegance. "You've designed it?" "Of course." Princess Judy unfolded a roll of parchment and showed her amusement park design plan to the teacher. Sylph seemed to have discovered a new toy. She was babbling as she tried to climb onto the design. Colin hugged the naughty little girl, sat up, and looked at Princess Judy's masterpiece with great interest. Prince Harrison also walked over. He first greeted Colin and Aisha, and then sat down on the woolen blanket that had been laid out. The half-elf maid, Kathy Savoy, quickly brought 2 cups of scented tea and placed them in front of Princess Judy and Prince Harrison. Prince Harrison did not seem to be interested in the amusement park design that his sister had painstakingly made. Instead, he started chatting with Kathy. On the other side, Princess Judy was excitedly introducing her design concept to Colin. According to her, for a genius child like Sylph who had awakened the noble phoenix bloodline at birth, of course, she could not be compared to ordinary children. Ordinary rides like slides, merry-go-rounds, trampolines, swings, and so on were too simple and childish for Sylph. Therefore, Princess Judy claimed that she had designed an adventure-themed amusement park. Based on famous heroic adventure stories, she had combined exploration, mazes, reasoning, treasure hunting, trapping, and other elements to create a wonderful game to clear the game. In the beginning, Colin was listening with great interest. But as Princess Judy talked, his face became darker and darker, because he found that the difficulty of this amusement park was a little too high. For example, in one section, Princess Judy actually asked the game participants to shoot a brown bear in order to pass the level. Colin could not help but put his hand on his forehead and lamented. Was this really an amusement park for children? It was simply a different world's version of the Squid Game. If he did not know that Princess Judy had always been a little unreliable, Colin would have suspected that she had designed this amusement park with evil intentions. Therefore, Colin did not hesitate to completely reject Princess Judy's design. No matter how coquettishly Princess Judy begged, it was useless. In the end, Princess Judy could only succumb to her teacher's abuse of power and dejectedly went back to redesign. Prince Harrison did not leave with his sister. Instead, he continued to sit on the woolen blanket and whispered to the half-elf maid, Kathy. Seeing this, Colin's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly asked, "Harrison, Kathy, what are you talking about?" Harrison hurriedly sat up straight and turned to face Colin. He replied, "Teacher, I was explaining to Miss Kathy why my sister wanted to put a brown bear in the amusement park." Colin's interest was also piqued. Because just 3 days ago, Judy heard that the half-elven palace was going to hold a hunting party and that there would be brown bears at the party. She was so excited that she wanted to hunt a brown bear with her own hands. Colin could not help but laugh. With her skinny arms and legs, she wants to hunt a brown bear? Prince Harrison was also a little embarrassed. He touched his nose and felt a little helpless about his sister's bold words. Seeing this, Kathy said, "His Highness just told me that he wanted to hunt a brown bear for his sister." That's right. Prince Harrison immediately straightened his back and nodded. Queen Aisha reminded with a smile, "Your Highness Harrison, then you must be careful. Brown bears are ferocious beasts that dominate the mountains. Also, before the hunting party, the head of the royal hunting party will purposely reduce their food. A hungry brown bear will become even more ferocious. Your Majesty, please do not worry. I will definitely be able to deal with it," Prince Harrison said confidently. Colin knew that Prince Harrison was now an apprentice knight. With his strength, it would be difficult for him to deal with a brown bear alone. However, he would not worry for his student. There would naturally be official knights guarding Prince Harrison at the hunting party. It was just a brown bear. There would be no accidents. Seeing Colin smiling without saying anything, Prince Harrison suddenly felt a little guilty. He could not help but ask the half-elf maid, "Miss Kathy, do you believe that I have the ability to hunt a brown bear?" "Your Highness, of course you can. I just hope that the brown bear will not be so frightened by your Highness that its legs go weak. Otherwise, the hunting party will be too boring." Kathy smiled. Her delicate little face was like a blooming flower. The young prince could not take his eyes off her. Prince Harrison stared at Kathy in a daze without even blinking. Kathy couldn't help but lower her head shyly under his intense gaze. Ahem. Colin's light cough brought Prince Harrison back to reality. He also realized that he had lost his composure. He did not dare to look into his teacher's eyes. He quickly lowered his head and said respectfully, "Teacher, I'll go check on Judy's amusement park design." With that, he ran off as if he was escaping. Chapter 407. After Prince Harrison left, Kathy put away the used teacup as if nothing had happened. However, her reddened ears still revealed that she was not as calm as she appeared to be. After putting away the teacup, Kathy stood up and saw Colin's scrutinizing gaze. The half-elf maid's heart trembled, and she asked guiltily, "My lord, do you have any orders?" Colin asked meaningfully, "Kathy, what do you think of Prince Harrison?" Kathy lowered her head, not daring to look Colin in the eyes. She answered carefully, "My lord, His Highness is smart and polite. He's an excellent noble." "Yes, but he's a human noble and the future emperor of the human race," Colin said in a deep voice. "Do you understand what I mean?" "I understand." Kathy could of course hear the warning in Colin's words. She hurriedly explained, "My lord, I only have respect for Prince Harrison. I don't dare to have any other thoughts." "That's good." Seeing that Colin did not have any further instructions, Kathy picked up the tableware on the woolen blanket and stepped back to give Colin and his family some privacy. "When we were at Red Maple Manor, I noticed that they were a little close," Queen Aisha said softly as she looked at Kathy's back. Colin teased Sylph in his arms as he asked, "Then do you think that Kathy deliberately seduced the young and ignorant Prince Harrison? Or that Prince Harrison, who had just awakened to love, fell in love with the beautiful Kathy?" Aisha shook her head with a smile. "Kathy probably wouldn't have the guts to seduce a prince of the empire, especially right under your nose." Colin also smiled. Kathy indeed wouldn't have the guts. However, after noticing Harrison's feelings for her, Kathy might have gone with the flow, or even added fuel to the fire. Although as the first heir to the throne, Harrison can't marry Kathy, but if Kathy could become Harrison's lover, she could borrow his power and even get pregnant with the blood of the San Lorenzo family. Even if she gave birth to an illegitimate child, it would still be a chance for the Savoy family to rise again. Colin could not help but think of Aisha's mother, Madame Sharon. She successfully married into the Miller family because of the blood of the house of St. Hilda. Aisha held her smooth chin and asked seriously, "Why don't you think that Kathy might be sincere?" Sincere? That's right. Not all feelings have political motives behind them. Colin subconsciously snorted, but when he turned around he saw Aisha's bright and beautiful eyes, looking at him with a strange gaze. He touched the tip of his nose, coughed, and said, "Forget it, let them be." This should be the problem for Emperor Reinhardt and Empress Medela. Aisha did not plan to let Colin go so easily. She slightly pouted her seductive red lips, moved to her lover's ear, and said, "Well then, Honorable Count Angeli, do you think that my feelings for you are sincere? Or do I want to borrow your power to control the half-elf kingdom?" Colin's heart skipped a beat. Aisha revealed a rare feminine side, and her soft and sweet voice made Colin's body melt. In his impression, Queen Elsa was the perfect example of a mature, graceful, and charming lady. She was also a determined, brave, and decisive knight with outstanding talent. Aisha was forced by her family to marry into the half-elf royal family, but she did not feel sorry for herself. Instead, she secretly planned and seized the perfect opportunity to avenge her former lover. After she was turned into a blood descendant by Colin, she had been doing her best to take care of everything in the half-elf kingdom for Colin. When he needed help, she did not hesitate to send the Silver Moon Guard to the northern frontier. She even gave birth to a cute baby girl for him. However, Colin had been deliberately avoiding a question. Did Aisha's feelings for him come from her heart, or did she covet his power, or was it because of the suppression of her bloodline? Correspondingly, did he really like Aisha? Or did he want to use her to control the half-elf kingdom? In fact, Colin had always been very suspicious, and he always liked to make bad guesses about people's motives. This allowed him to smoothly reach his current position and not be schemed against by people with ulterior motives. But for Aisha, Colin was immersed in his own thoughts when he suddenly saw a beautiful face suddenly appear in front of him. Then, his mouth was blocked by a pair of soft and warm red lips. Since he hadn't closed his eyes yet, Colin could clearly see that Elsa's beautiful face was dyed with a layer of blush. The delicate rouge-like color extended all the way to the tip of her slender ears. Her slender and fine eyelashes were constantly trembling, and there seemed to be a sparkling and translucent tear glistening in her half-closed eyes. At this moment, Aisha took off the proud veil of a queen and revealed the image of a delicate and charming half-elf noble lady in front of Colin. In his previous life, Colin had heard a saying, "You can tell a girl's feelings for you from a kiss." Back then, the straight man did not think much of it. But now, Colin realized that he could truly feel Aisha's strong love for him. A strong emotion burst out from the depths of his heart, and finally, he clearly understood that his feelings for Aisha could not be hidden. When the love was strong, all that was left was a desperate possessiveness. Colin closed his eyes, lifted Aisha's sharp chin, and kissed her moist red lips. Her lover's passionate response made Aisha understand Colin's feelings. At this moment, she seemed to be wrapped in great happiness, and tears of joy fell uncontrollably. Sylph, who was ignored, suddenly waved her hands and pulled the two out of the net of love. Colin patted the little girls but gently in annoyance, blaming her for ruining his good deed. Although Aisha was not satisfied, she still took her daughter back into her arms and glanced at Colin flirtatiously. It seemed to be anger, but it was more like charm. Colin secretly gritted his teeth and prepared to respond to Aisha's provocation at night. If Kathy and Harrison are truly in love, then let them be. Colin thought for himself and finally decided to give his maid and student a chance. Aisha nodded with a smile and did not dwell on this topic. She changed the topic and said, "The palace doctor, Cliff, was kidnapped on his way home last night. Colin did not show any surprise when he heard that. Instead, he smiled and said, I already know. And that Viscount Fines left Silvermoon City early this morning. It seems that he has successfully obtained the information he wanted. This is not surprising. Cliff is an ordinary doctor. He can't withstand torture. Well, I don't mean to blame Cliff. On the contrary, this doctor suffered because of my plan this time. When this is over, I can make it up to him. I'll remember that. However, for the other half-elves who participated in this kidnapping, I didn't expect that there would be fish that escaped the net after the last settlement. Hearing Colin's murderous words, Aisha just said lightly, as long as the eastern region is still there, some half-elves will have fantasies. Colin smiled coldly and said, Eastern region? It's time to settle the score with them. Chapter 408. Eastern Region, White Dew City. The house of St. Prospero's White Dew Castle was located in the center of White Dew City. Surrounding it was the noble district of White Dew City. Commoners had to have a pass to enter and exit the city. Outside the noble district was the commercial district. This was where rich merchants gathered. Although the location was good and the buildings were not that shabby compared to the noble district, no nobles were willing to live here. After all, no matter how rich a merchant was, he was still a commoner. There was an essential difference between him and the nobles. However, there was one family that was an exception, the Hall family. The Hall family lived outside the noble district of White Dew City. It was not because they were poor or had a low title. On the contrary, the Hall family was famous for their wealth in the eastern region. As for their title, they were a proper hereditary count family of the empire. They lived in the commercial district because the ancestors of the Hall family were merchants. Titles could not be bought with money. However, if you had enough money, you could buy a noble lady with noble blood and a very precious baptism quota for commoners. Thus, the Hall family obtained the noble's admission ticket. As for how they climbed step by step from a wild knight family to a count of the empire, it was all thanks to the mages of Yule. If they had not used a forbidden spell to destroy the original White Dew City, causing a large number of families in the eastern region to lose their inheritance, the Hall family would not have had the opportunity to take advantage of the situation. Moreover, during the most difficult and dangerous period of the eastern region, the Hall family saw the opportunity to help the House of St. Prospero rebuild White Dew City. Only then did they officially enter the noble class of the empire. In addition, the descendants of the Hall family were also quite capable. Although they were descendants of merchants, they were full of martial virtues and made many military achievements. Gradually, the Hall family's title was promoted to count, and they became one of the most influential families in the eastern region. However, in terms of martial strength and knight rank, the members of the Hall family were somewhat inferior. After all, their ancestors were commoners, and their bloodline was mixed. Even if the family's bloodline was improved through marriage, they could not be compared to the old nobles who had thousands of years of inheritance in a short time. However, the ancestors of the Hall family were indeed very smart. They knew the principle of playing to their strengths and avoiding their weaknesses. When the members of this family joined the army, without exception, they all joined the navy and would never join the army. The reason was very simple. Compared to the army's head-on clashes on land, naval warfare relied more on warships and teamwork. The requirements for individual strength were much lower. Moreover, the strength of the Eastern Territories Navy was unmatched on the new Shui River. Earl Hall was in his 50s. He was tall and burly and his hair was thick. His skin was a healthy bronze color, and he had a roughness that seemed to have been tempered by wind and rain. He was clearly different from the generally pampered nobles of the eastern region. His facial features were chiseled, and his grayish-brown eyes were bright. His broad forehead was wrapped in a glossy reindeer skin bandage, and his long blonde hair and beard were tied into small braids with a fishbone hairband. At this moment, Earl Hall was meeting a gorgeously dressed guest in the living room. Unlike Earl Hall's boorishness, this guest was a typical Eastern Territory noble. His skin was fair and he was handsome. His every movement was filled with awe-inspiring majesty and elegance. The same Earl's attire on him and Earl Hall were two completely different concepts. This person was Earl Bruggen, a veteran Eastern Territory noble. The two earls of the Eastern region had completely different styles, but they had one thing in common: they were both supporters of Marquis Vincent. Especially Earl Hall, who had even married his precious daughter to Marquis Vincent. Now that Marquis Vincent was trapped in Silvermoon City, the two earls were naturally anxious. "Earl Bruggen, what news did you get? Why are you in such a hurry to see me?" Earl Hall's loud voice echoed in the living room. Earl Bruggen pointed to his ear with a look of disdain. "This isn't your worship. Lower your voice, my ears can't stand it." Earl Hall snorted softly. He was very disdainful of Earl Bruggen's pretentiousness, but he also lowered his voice slightly. In fact, Earl Bruggen also despised this lowly and fishy Earl Hall from the bottom of his heart. If it weren't for the critical situation at this time, where the Bruggen family had to unite with the Hall family, he wouldn't have been willing to come to this mansion in the business district. Viscount Finn has already returned. Calculating the time, he should arrive in White Dew City tomorrow. What news did this kid bring back? What conditions did the people of the Northern Frontier propose to redeem him? The people of the Northern Frontier are unwilling to accept the proposal of exchanging the city for Marquis Vincent. They insist on the worship, in your dreams. Before Count Bruggen could finish, Count Hall roared at the top of his lungs. His loud voice shook the crystal chandelier on the ceiling, causing it to shake non-stop. Earl Bruggen only felt as if he was being blown by a strong wind and wave. He hurriedly held his breath, frowned, and pressed his hands down. "I know those warships are your precious treasures, but if we can really exchange them for Marquis Vincent, would you still disagree?" Earl Hall panted heavily and didn't say anything for a long time. It was obvious that he agreed tacitly. But then he realized that there was something wrong with Earl Bruggen's words. He asked doubtfully, "Why does it sound like the warships can't be exchanged for Marquis Vincent?" Only then did Earl Bruggen sigh and say, "I've received news that Marquis Vincent might have met with an accident." "What?" Earl Hall stood up abruptly and stared at Earl Bruggen with his bell-sized eyes. "What do you mean by an accident?" Earl Hall's shock made Earl Bruggen very irritated. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this silly Earl in front of him might not be able to be of help to him. Marquis Vincent was assassinated after he was captured. Although the people of the Northern Frontier have always claimed that the Marquis is fine, it is said that Viscount Fine has already found out that the Marquis has actually been assassinated. Bam! Earl Hall smashed the armrest of his chair into pieces with a slap and shouted, "How can you believe the words of that kid Fine? He's one of Evan's men. He can't wait for Marquis Vincent to die in Silvermoon City. I'm sure that he deliberately made up such a lie because he didn't want Marquis Vincent to return to the Eastern region safely." It was rare for Earl Bruggen to agree with Earl Hall's opinion. He nodded and said, "I think so too. When Viscount Fine arrives in White Dew City tomorrow, you and I will go and meet the Duke together. We can't let Fine mislead the Duke's judgment." "All right." Also, Earl of Avon has already left the Northern Frontier. Do you have any news of his current whereabouts? That kid is very slippery. It's obvious that he's deliberately hiding his tracks. It's difficult for me to find him in such a short time. Earl Bruggen furrowed his brows and asked in a deep voice, "Why do you think the Earl of Avon is deliberately hiding his tracks?" "How would I know?" Earl Hall shouted in a rough voice. "Hasn't that kid always been like this? He's so mysterious. I don't know what he's up to." Seeing that he couldn't get anything of value out of this silly fellow, Earl Bruggen sighed inwardly. He made an appointment with Earl Hall to meet the Duke of St. Prospero the next day and then got up to leave. Chapter 409. The guest hall of White Dew Castle was decorated extremely luxuriously. The arched dome was made of century-old mahogany from the radiant moon forest. It was pasted with gold foil, inlaid with gems, and hung with crystal candlesticks and chandeliers. The painters skillfully used these expensive decorations and the changes in light and shadow to depict the magnificent epic of the first generation of paladins of the House of St. Prospero. While luxurious, it was also full of artistic aura. It was vigorous and heroic, but not vulgar. The beautiful maids of the Duke's mansion, who had been carefully groomed by the Duke's mansion, entered the room in a single file. They presented the three guests with all kinds of fruits, pastries, and silver wine jugs. They filled each guest's wine cup with transparent wine, and an elegant, mellow, and exotic wine aroma filled the room. Count Hall raised his glass and downed the wine in it in one gulp. Then, he glanced at the silent Count Bruggen beside him, then stared at Viscount Finn, who was sitting upright and still opposite him. He couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong?" "Viscount Finn, how was the trip to Silver Moon City this time?" Viscount Finn came back to his senses. Just as he was about to speak, he saw a dignified figure stride into the hall. "Your Grace." The three of them immediately stood up and bowed to the Duke of St. Prospero. The Duke of St. Prospero sat down on the main seat of the sofa in the living room. He raised his arm and said, "Have a seat." The three of them immediately sat down. The Duke of St. Prospero took a sip of his rum and said, "Viscount Finn, tell me about the situation in Silver Moon City first." "Yes, Your Grace." Viscount Finn stood up and bowed slightly. Then, he said, "I met Count Angeli on this trip to Silver Moon City and discussed the redemption of Marquis Vincent with him. However, this person firmly disagreed with your proposal of exchanging Monolith City for Marquis Vincent. He said that he was only willing to accept warships as the price for Marquis Vincent's redemption." At this point, Viscount Finn bowed slightly again, indicating that he was done. Count Hall blinked and turned to look at Count Bruggen. He saw that the other party was also confused. Because in their opinion, the Viscounts had missed the most important piece of information. Was Marquis Vincent dead or alive? Logically speaking, as a supporter of the Earl of Avon, Viscount Finn would definitely report to the Duke of St. Prospero as soon as he found out that Marquis Vincent had been assassinated. Then, he would persuade the other party to re-establish the heir to the title. But now, Viscount Finn did not mention Marquis Vincent's situation. He did not even mention the confirmed news that the other party had been assassinated in Half-Elven Palace. Count Hall's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly realized that this meant that Viscount Finn himself was not sure whether Marquis Vincent was alive or dead, so he did not dare to spout nonsense in front of the Duke of St. Prospero. Thinking of this, his eyes were suddenly filled with unconcealable joy. But what puzzled him was that Count Bruggen, who was beside him, seemed even more worried. After listening to Viscount Finn's report, the Duke of St. Prospero nodded expressionlessly. Then he looked at Count Hall and Count Bruggen and said, "Since the two of you are here, why don't you share your thoughts? Should we use the warship in exchange for Vincent?" Count Bruggen was the first to speak. "Your Grace, I think this matter must be considered carefully. The New Shui River is the most important barrier for us to resist the cavalry of the northern frontier, and the Pegasus Navy is the key to whether we can control the New Shui River. Therefore, even if we want to use the warship in exchange for Marquis Vincent, we must carefully control the number and tonnage of the warship. We must not let the northern frontier take this opportunity to build a navy that can compete with us." The Duke of St. Prospero put down his wineglass and looked at Count Hall, obviously wanting to hear his opinion. The Hall family had a huge influence in the Pegasus Navy. A large number of mid-level and high-level officers were from the Hall family. Even the supreme commander of the Navy was Count Hall himself. It could even be said that half of the Pegasus Navy was the private army of the Hall family. Therefore, if they wanted to use the warship in exchange for Marquis Vincent, Count Hall's opinion was crucial. Seeing that the Duke of St. Prospero was looking at him, Count Hall said, "Your Grace, I agree with Count Bruggen's opinion. Previously, Count Angeli's conditions were too harsh. He almost wanted to destroy all the warships of our navy. We definitely can't agree to this. In my opinion, we can give the northern frontier at most 3 heavy warships. The limit of the paddle warships can be relaxed, but it can't exceed 50. As for the transport ships, we can give more depending on the situation. This way, we can ensure that the Pegasus Navy still has an absolute advantage in terms of strength. Even if the northern frontier obtains those warships, they won't be able to build a fleet that can compete with us in a short period of time. However, we can't let our guard down because of this. After successfully redeeming Marquis Vincent, we can find a suitable time and excuse to send the Pegasus Navy against the current and find the northern frontier's navy to fight a battle. We can nip the danger in the bud." The Duke of St. Prospero nodded. He was very satisfied with Count Hall's suggestion and immediately said in a clear voice, "All right, if that's the case, Viscount's fines, make another trip to Silver Moon City and renegotiate the conditions of Vincent's redemption with Count Angeli. The bottom line will be according to what Count Hall said just now." "Yes, Your Grace." "Count Hall." The Duke of St. Prospero turned his head to look at Count Hall again and ordered, "Please go to Waterside Port immediately and explain the situation to the Pegasus Navy soldiers. Calm them down and prepare for the handover." Count Hall immediately replied, "All right, that's it. I hope that all of you will work together to successfully redeem Vincent." After the Duke of St. Prospero finished speaking, he got up and left the living room, as if something urgent was waiting for him. Viscount's fines seemed to be infected by the Duke of St. Prospero's swift and decisive attitude. He immediately strode out of the living room and didn't talk to the two counts any longer. Count Hall scratched the back of his head. He had a nagging feeling that things had gone too smoothly today, so smoothly that it made him feel a little uneasy. He looked at Count Bruggen. Seeing that the other party didn't say anything, he swallowed the words in his stomach and walked out with his head lowered. After leaving White Dew Castle, Count Hall finally couldn't help but stop Count Bruggen and ask, "Why didn't that kid Viscount's fines mention the assassination of Marquis Vincent? Does this mean that he's not sure if the Marquis is alive or dead?" Count Bruggen turned back to look at Count Hall. After a moment of silence, he muttered, "Perhaps." After saying that, he ignored Count Hall, who was still in a dilemma, and turned to get into his carriage. In fact, the abnormality of Viscount's fines today didn't eliminate Count Bruggen's worries. On the contrary, it even made him feel a chill that went deep into his bones. He knew very well that even if Viscount's fines couldn't confirm whether Marquis Vincent was alive or dead, he would definitely raise his doubts in front of the Duke of St. Prospero. Only then would he be able to influence the Duke of St. Prospero's judgment and prevent him from making up his mind to negotiate the ransom terms with the northern frontier. This was the most beneficial choice for the Earl of Avon. But today, Viscount's fines didn't mention this matter at all. And the Duke of St. Prospero seemed to be determined to use the warship in exchange for Marquis Vincent. This seemed to be a great thing for Count Bruggen, but he wasn't happy at all. Such an abnormality made him unable to help but have a terrifying thought. Could it be that Marquis Vincent was really dead? And the actions of the Duke of St. Prospero and Viscount's fines were just using the ransom as an excuse for another scheme? The more Count Bruggen thought about it, the more he felt that this was the truth of the matter, and this truth made his heart bleed. If Marquis Vincent really died in Silver Moon City, it meant that all the efforts the family had invested in him over the years had been in vain. In the future, when the Earl of Avon inherited the position of Duke of the Eastern Region, would he neglect the Bruggen family because of this, or even liquidate them? Just like that, he returned home in a daze. The butler came forward to report that an important guest had come to visit. Count Bruggen even forgot to ask who the important guest was, and followed the butler to the parlor. "Long time no see, Count." A familiar voice rang in Count Bruggen's ears. He suddenly raised his head and saw the Earl of Avon standing in the parlor, looking at him with a smile. Chapter 410. Earl of Avon. Count Bruggen's voice was trembling. He finally understood why the Earl of Avon had been hiding his whereabouts. It turned out that he had already secretly returned to White Dew City from the northern frontier and had probably reached an agreement with the Duke of St. Prospero. That was why Viscount's Finn didn't even mention the possibility of Marquis Vincent's assassination during the meeting at White Dew Castle just now. The Duke of St. Prospero's decisiveness and swiftness could only mean one thing. He had confirmed the death of his eldest son, Marquis Vincent, and was determined to support his second son, the Earl of Avon, as the heir to the title. After realizing this, Count Bruggen's face paled visibly, and despair slowly appeared in his eyes. After a moment of silence, he opened his mouth and said bitterly, "Earl of Avon, are you here to laugh at us?" The Earl of Avon shook his head slowly and said in a low voice, "No. I just want to avoid making the Eastern region a joke." Count Bruggen frowned and looked at the Earl of Avon with a puzzled expression. He obviously didn't understand what he meant. The Earl of Avon sat down in his seat and took a sip of the coffee in front of him. Then he smiled and said, "Count Bruggen, you're so smart. I'm sure you've already guessed the truth of the matter? Count Bruggen nodded bitterly and said, Marquis Vincent should have died in Silvery Moon City, right? The Earl of Avon nodded and said, yes. My poor brother. He probably couldn't believe that he had died in the hands of a crazy half-elf. Count Bruggen wanted to ask how Marquis Vincent had died, but he suddenly felt an indescribable sense of helplessness when the words were about to come out of his mouth. So he shut his mouth with flagging interest. What was the use of dwelling on these things now? With Marquis Vincent's death, the Earl of Avon's succession as the Duke of the Eastern region was set in stone. The Bruggen family's many years of hard work had been completely destroyed. The Earl of Avon looked at the silent Count Bruggen and took the initiative to comfort him. Count Bruggen, as I said just now, I'm not here to laugh at you. On the contrary, I want to prevent the Eastern region from becoming a joke. Count Bruggen took a deep breath and pulled himself together again. He asked, I don't quite understand what you mean. The Earl of Avon stopped beating around the bush and said bluntly, I know that many nobles in the Eastern region are actually supporters of my brother, including you. But whether you believe it or not, I have never resented you from beginning to end, and will not retaliate in the future. Count Bruggen looked at the Earl of Avon expressionlessly and said nothing. In fact, there was a reason why most of the nobles in the Eastern region supported Marquis Vincent. Marquis Vincent was a full 10 years older than the Earl of Avon. For a full 10 years before the Earl of Avon was born, the Duke of St. Prospero only had one legitimate son. Under such circumstances, the Duke of St. Prospero had long since appointed Vincent as the Marquis of the Eastern region, officially confirming his status as the first heir. At that time, almost all of the nobles in the Eastern region believed that Vincent would become the future Duke of the Eastern region, so as long as they weren't stupid, they began to invest in him in advance. For example, Earl Hall rushed to marry his daughter to Marquis Vincent. Another example was the Bruggen family. Almost all of the outstanding children in the family followed Marquis Vincent. The Duke of St. Prospero didn't interfere too much in this situation. After all, he really only had one son at that time. In fact, even after Evan was born later, the Duke of St. Prospero didn't have any intention of changing his heir. Even though as time passed, he found that his second son was actually smarter. However, the Duke of St. Prospero also understood that if he abolished the elder and replaced the younger, there would be trouble. The nobles in the Eastern region who had already bet on Marquis Vincent weren't willing to see Evan take the throne. Therefore, during the first chaos in Silver Moon, Marquis Vincent was ordered to ambush the Black Cavalry in the Shadow Canyon. This was obviously a free opportunity to increase his reputation, while the Earl of Avon was sent to Silver Moon City to deal with a situation that was almost certain to be lost. This difference in treatment also reflected the Duke of St. Prospero's attitude towards his two sons. However, the development of the situation later was beyond everyone's expectations. After Marquis Vincent defeated the famous Black Cavalry in the Shadow Canyon and captured the northern frontier's #1 war god, Marquis Garcia, he seemed to be a little arrogant and sent troops to attack Silver Moon City. What was even more shocking was that he was defeated by the weak half-elves and the unknown Colin Angeli. It was a crushing defeat. The Pegasus Legion was completely annihilated, and even Marquis Vincent himself became Colin's prisoner. This kind of blow made the Duke of St. Prospero's heart waver. Although Marquis Vincent was successfully redeemed, the Duke of St. Prospero obviously had the idea of changing his heir. The engagement between the Earl of Avon and Prince Lacy's daughter was a clear proof. Most of the nobles in the Eastern region had already bet on Marquis Vincent. They couldn't support the Duke of St. Prospero in changing his heir, so the Duke of St. Prospero could only help his second son find a strong foreign aid. Unfortunately, the world was unpredictable. The Earl of Avon's strong foreign aid unexpectedly met with an accident. The nobles in the Eastern region suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the situation had taken a turn for the better. However, they didn't expect that the unwilling Marquis Vincent would actually run to Silver Moon City. Not only did he fail to avenge his previous humiliation, but he also lost his own life. With so many twists and turns, the nobles in the Eastern region, including Count Bruggen, were all hit hard. They were mentally and physically exhausted and didn't know how to deal with the current situation. Even if the Earl of Avon personally promised that he wouldn't retaliate, Count Bruggen didn't dare to believe him so easily. Back then, in order to ensure that Marquis Vincent's inheritance wasn't threatened, a group of nobles in the eastern region, including Count Bruggen, spared no effort to suppress and ostracize the Earl of Avon, forcing him to look for foreign aid like Prince Lacy. In the entire eastern region, except for marginal families like the Fines, which weren't very valued to begin with, almost half of the noble circle had offended the Earl of Avon. Under such circumstances, the ascension of the Earl of Avon was very likely to turn into a political disaster. Naturally, the Earl of Avon was well aware of this. Therefore, looking at Count Bruggen, whose eyes were wandering and whose expression was constantly changing, he decisively threw out a heavy bomb. "Count Bruggen, your daughter, Miss Grace, is dignified, virtuous, elegant, and beautiful. In fact, I have long admired her. I hereby formally propose marriage to you." Count Bruggen's eyes widened. He couldn't believe his ears. But the Earl of Avon had already stood up from his seat. He first bowed, then respectfully presented a handwritten letter to Count Bruggen. Count Bruggen took it and opened it. He found that it was indeed a marriage contract, and it had the Duke of St. Prospero's personal signature on it. Miss Shelia, daughter of Prince Lacy. In view of Prince Lacy's actions in Imperial Dragon City, my father will publicly announce the cancellation of my engagement with Miss Shelia. Count Bruggen stared fixedly at the Earl of Avon. He was obviously caught off guard by such a change. The Earl of Avon also stared into Count Bruggen's eyes and said seriously, "Count Bruggen, I have already shown my sincerity. Now it's your turn." Count Bruggen's expression finally changed. He clutched the parchment in his hands tightly, took a deep breath, and said in a deep voice, "Good. Since you, Earl of Avon, value my daughter so much, I certainly won't object to this marriage." The Earl of Avon smiled and said, "Father-in-law, my foundation in the eastern region is shallow. I'll have to trouble you in the future. Don't worry, I'll help you appease the nobles one by one. I'll let them understand that the era of Marquis Vincent is over. You are the future of the eastern region." At this point, Count Bruggen suddenly frowned and said, "But there's one person who I'm afraid. Are you talking about Count Hall?" The Earl of Avon immediately interrupted. "That's right. After all, his daughter is married to Vincent." The Earl of Avon smiled confidently and said calmly, "Don't worry about that. You don't have to worry about that. I have already made arrangements for the Hall family." Chapter 411. Silver Moon City. Crystal River. Hundreds of tents, stables, and carriages turned the vast grassland into a huge camp. Other than the half-elf nobles and their squires, there were also tens of thousands of civilians who came to watch the hunting party. Nobles dressed in splendid attire, soldiers in shining armor, fine horses adorned with gold and silver, excited people, children running all over the place, bards in strange clothes, acrobats working hard, mercenaries with rude manners, hawkers shouting loudly, and countless flags fluttering in the wind, formed a vivid and wonderful picture. The annual hunting party was a large festival only held by the half-elves. It was also a rare entertainment. Of course, a high-rank knight like Colin would not participate in the hunting party. After all, no matter how fierce the beasts were, they were not qualified to be his prey. The main participants of the hunting party were the low-rank professionals and apprentices. After the hunting party, there was a martial arts competition. The hunting party was just an appetizer. The martial arts competition was the main course. In the martial arts competition, the real high-rank professionals would participate. They would show their strength and courage in front of the queen and win their own honor. Every year, the winner of the martial arts competition would be personally rewarded by the half-elf queen. Swords, armors, horses, and even titles would be given out. Before this year's martial arts competition, there was a rumor that the rewards of this year's martial arts competition would be unprecedentedly rich. There would even be titles as rewards. The half-elves believed in this rumor. During the previous rebellion, the half-elf nobles were cleansed. Many titles and positions were vacant and needed to be filled. Therefore, Queen Aisha would use this martial arts competition as an opportunity to find new blood and train new nobles who were loyal to her. With such expectations, this year's hunting party became unprecedentedly grand. Almost all of the half-elf nobles, even those who had been stripped of their titles, such as the Loot family of Alfalfa City, had sent their knights to Silvermoon City, hoping that some of them could stand out and be appreciated by the queen, restoring their family's glory. When Colin and Queen Aisha arrived at the viewing platform, there was already a sea of people around the venue. The ceremonial officer was loudly chanting the names of Queen Aisha and Earl Angeli, announcing their arrival. Queen Aisha held Colin's arm generously, and the half-elf maid Kathy carried Sylph behind them. Together, they went to the main seats of the viewing platform. The half-elf nobles along the way all stood up to greet Queen Aisha and Earl Angeli. Aisha and Colin had perfect elegant smiles on their faces and nodded in response. Even in such a public place, Queen Aisha acted like a gentle and beautiful wife, accompanying her husband. Perhaps she felt that since everyone knew about her relationship with Colin, there was no need to deliberately hide it anymore. Also, in the half-elf kingdom, no one dared to challenge Aisha's authority. Also, with the purity of Sylph's phoenix bloodline, even if she was an illegitimate daughter, no one would say that she was not qualified to be the half-elf queen. Woo! Amidst the sound of the horn, the hunting team gradually appeared at the edge of the forest not far away. They were galloping toward the viewing platform. Master! Master! Brother really hunted a brown bear. Before reaching the platform, Colin heard Princess Judy's loud voice. Even the rumbling of the horse hooves could not cover it. Is that so? Colin stood up and greeted the returning hunting team with a smile. Prince Harrison took the lead and naturally rushed to the front of the team. When he was about to reach the viewing platform, he skillfully reined in the horse's reins, slowed down, and jumped down from the horse's back. He rushed forward a few steps and stopped right in front of the platform. He bowed and said, "Yes, master. Please allow me to give this honor to you." Logically speaking, today's praise should all be given to Queen Aisha, but Prince Harrison's identity was special. He was not a vassal of the half-elf queen, so no one dared to say that he was rude. Colin looked at the giant brown bear's corpse that was being pulled over by the flatbed cart and was a little surprised. Thinking about it, even his predecessor didn't have the ability to hunt an adult brown bear alone when he was Harrison's age. It seemed that this student of his was quite talented. Very good. Colin nodded with a smile and praised. Prince Harrison raised his head with a smug smile on his face. Princess Judy rode her pony to the front of the platform and yelled, "Master, what about our reward?" Colin raised an eyebrow and asked, "What reward do you want?" Before Prince Harrison could say anything, Princess Judy yelled, "I want Bella." As she said that, she waved the reins in her hand, indicating that Bella was the pony she was riding just now. That pony impatiently scratched the ground with its claws. Clearly, it hadn't been completely tamed by Princess Judy. This pony was the property of the half-elf royal family, but it was only a pony. Colin didn't even need to ask Aisha. He nodded with a smile and said, Of course, it's my honor. But you have to let your servants feed it carefully. This Miss Bella doesn't seem to have a good temper." "I'll feed Bella myself." Princess Judy hugged the pony's neck and scratched it affectionately with her snow-white hands. It seemed that she had scratched an itch, and the pony actually let out a comfortable purr. Princess Judy immediately started giggling. Colin looked at her charmingly naive appearance and laughed as well. Then, he turned to Prince Harrison and asked, "Harrison, what reward do you want?" Prince Harrison hesitated for a moment and secretly glanced at the viewing platform. Then, he immediately retracted his gaze and said, "Teacher, your approval is the best reward for me." Colin didn't need to look back to know that Prince Harrison must have secretly glanced at his half-elf maid, Kathy. But fortunately, he still had some sense of propriety and didn't dare to ask Colin for Kathy on such an occasion. Then, Colin returned to his seat and let the other half-elf nobles present their prey to Queen Aisha. After the presentation, the long horn sounded again through the viewing platform. 2 knights riding tall warhorses slowly stepped onto the field, and the highly anticipated martial arts competition officially began. At the same time, an attendant quickly came to Colin and reported, "Your Majesty, Count, the messenger of the Eastern region is outside asking for an audience." Colin smiled faintly and said, "He came at the right time. Invite him to come and enjoy this tournament." Not long after, Viscount Finn was led to the viewing platform by the attendant. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." Viscount Finn respectfully saluted his master. Colin withdrew his gaze from the field and said with a smile, "Viscount Finn, you've had a hard time. Why don't you watch the tournament first?" Viscount Finn nodded in response, but he didn't take a seat. Instead, he continued, "Your Majesty, our Eastern region has also prepared a big gift for the winner of this tournament." Queen Aisha was slightly stunned. Then, she narrowed her eyes and looked at the young Viscounts of the Eastern region. "Viscount Finn, you're too kind. However, the half-elf subjects don't need the Eastern region to reward them. Logically speaking, since the host had already explicitly refused, the guests should have retreated." However, Viscount Finn clapped his hands and asked the squire behind him to take out a knight's sword. "Your Majesty, don't worry too much. This is just a small gift from the Eastern region." Colin didn't care at first, but when his gaze fell on the knight's sword, he instantly clenched his fists. Because he recognized the knight's sword, it was the sword of Marquis Garcia. Chapter 412. This was a blatant provocation. Colin narrowed his eyes and looked at the knight's sword that Viscounts had taken out. His heart was boiling with anger. Viscount Finn ignored Colin's anger and didn't even forget to continue provoking him. "Count Angeli, you should know this sword, right? It was left in White Dew City after Marquis Garcia was captured last time. He forgot to take it with him." Knight Roger, who was sitting below Colin, stood up abruptly. With red eyes, he was about to rush towards Viscount Finn, but Colin reached out to stop him. Of course, he also wanted to kill this arrogant Eastern Viscounts, but it would be too barbaric to do so on such an occasion. Moreover, he wanted to know what the Eastern region was up to. So, Colin nodded to Aisha. Queen Aisha understood, smiled slightly, and said, "Since the Eastern region is so generous and is willing to provide additional rewards for the winners of this tournament, then it would be impolite for me to refuse." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Viscounts bowed and then sat down. The tournament continued, but the atmosphere quietly became a little subtle. However, the mentality of the contestants did not change much. Defeating their opponents and winning the favor of the Queen was still their highest goal. As for the rather sensitive rewards that the Eastern region took out, the contestants all felt that as long as they won it back and gave it to Count Angeli, then it would be fine. Although it was somewhat embarrassing that a Marquis of the Northern Frontier needed the help of half-elves to win back the sword, this was after all the trouble that the Eastern region made, and Count Angeli would not be angry with the half-elves. There were also some half-elven nobles who felt that things could not be so simple. Since the Eastern region had taken out Marquis Garcia's sword to provoke them, it would be impossible for the sword to return to the Northern Frontier so easily. But no matter what the crowd thought, the tournament still continued. At dusk, the tournament was gradually coming to an end. The two finalists were riding their tall steeds around the field. While the horses were getting used to the field, they were also showing off their elegance to the audience and winning the cheers of their supporters. One of them, a handsome young knight, was especially popular with the audience. He was about 25 years old and was wearing a shining silver chainmail. There was a confident smile on his handsome face. Under the setting sun, his lazy curly hair looked like melted gold. He was riding a snow-white horse with a golden kite shield on the left side of the horse's back. There was a thorny emblem engraved on it, which was the emblem of the half-elf royal Miller family. This young half-elf knight named Carl Miller was Queen Elsa's cousin according to seniority. His royal status and handsome appearance immediately made Knight Carl the center of attention. Every time he raised his eagle-winged helmet to the audience, there would always be waves of praise. Some passionate and bold half-elf girls would even throw fresh flowers at Knight Carl to express their love. The previous Duke Muller had been killed by Colin because of his conspiracy to poison Queen Aisha, but the Miller family's position of Duke was vacant. Moreover, the successor had not been announced. Although the succession order had long been clear, Queen Aisha did not say anything. Obviously, she did not approve of the current succession order. This also caused the hearts of the Miller family members to waver. All the family members began to rub their fists, eager to give it a try. They were prepared to display their skills in this martial arts competition and enter Queen Elsa's line of sight. If they could catch the Queen's eye, they might become the successor of the Duke. However, Colin knew that the reason why Aisha did not announce Duke Muller's successor was because she was planning to abolish the Miller family's title of Duke. In her opinion, since the Miller family had become a half-elf royal family, there was no need to keep the title of Duke. Moreover, after experiencing the betrayal of her mother and brother, Queen Aisha also began to feel that keeping the title of Duke would only cause division in the Miller family. Some people would have thoughts that they should not have. Of course, these thoughts had not been made public. Therefore, Carl Miller could still continue to have a beautiful dream and enjoy the cheers of the crowd. Compared to the proud knight Carl, another knight who had made it to the finals did not receive such treatment. It was a knight in his early 40s. His short gray hair stood up, and there were traces of wind and sun on his bronze face. His tightly pursed lips and light brown eyes outlined a determined expression, just like the red bronze armor he was wearing. The style of the armor was old and polished. There was no noble coat of arms on it, so it was obvious that this was a wandering knight in dire straits. His mount was a common date red horse. It was strong but not eye-catching. There were no fancy steps, and it just carried its master slowly. Compared to the brilliant Carl Miller, this wandering knight was too shabby. Moreover, when he signed up for the tournament, the name he filled in was Joseph. Yes, only a name, no surname. However, he was also a knight, which meant that this person was most likely an illegitimate son of some family. Moreover, he did not have the recognition of his family, so he did not dare to use his family's surname. After circling around the arena, the two knights came to the viewing platform at the same time. They jumped off their horses, raised their wooden spears, and bowed to Queen Aisha. Queen Aisha stood up and said in a clear voice, "This is a fair competition. I hope that you will uphold the benevolence of knights and not hurt your opponent to win a glorious victory. The Almighty God of Light is with you." The competition of knights was indeed a very dangerous sport. Casualties were almost unavoidable. Even if the competitors were required to use a wooden spear as a weapon, this kind of polite weapon could be lethal in the hands of a knight. Therefore, the competition also stipulated that the knights could only stab each other with their spears on horseback. In this kind of one-on-one duel, both sides would use their spears to stab each other off the horse. This would determine the winner in one blow. This could avoid too much fighting and reduce the probability of casualties. But even so, it was still unable to completely eliminate the casualties. This time, in the final round of the tournament, there were already 7 unlucky people who had lost their lives, more than 20 people who were disabled, and countless people who were injured. It could be said that the arena in front of the viewing platform was already stained with the blood of the competitors. However, such casualties could not stop the half-elves from participating enthusiastically. If the knights did not even have the courage to face death, how could they gain the favor of the queen and even obtain the title of nobility? Woo! In the melodious sound of the horn, the 2 knights participating in the final round came to the side of the arena and prepared to charge. The audience at the scene waved their arms excitedly and shouted non-stop, pushing the atmosphere to the climax. Chapter 4:13. The horn sounded and the 2 war horses began to gallop. The wooden viewing platform also shook. The 2 knights leaned forward on their horses and pointed their lances at each other's chests. As the distance between them shortened, the momentum of the 2 knights increased rapidly. 30 meters, 10 meters, 5 meters. The wooden lances pierced through the air and whistled through the air. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. But at the moment of contact, Joseph suddenly changed from a stab to a sweep. The afterimage of the lance formed a crescent moon in the air and fiercely slashed at his opponent, wanting to sweep him off his horse. Carl Miller's pupils shrank, but he did not panic because the shield beside him had blocked Joseph's sweep. The lance in his hand had pierced the armor in front of his opponent's chest. Bang! The two lances exploded at the same time and wooden shards flew in all directions. Carl Miller swayed a few times on his horse and almost fell off. But he skillfully used his excellent equestrian skills to stabilize his body. Joseph, on the other hand, was sent flying like a cannonball. This knight in red copper armor nimbly flipped in the air and landed on his feet. He took 3 steps back before finally stabilizing himself. According to the rules of the competition, falling off the horse was considered a loss. I lost. Joseph shook his head and threw away the broken lance in his hand. He took off his helmet and revealed a weather-beaten face. His date-red horse walked to its master's side and snorted, as if comforting Joseph. Carl Miller also walked over and took off his helmet. He revealed a victorious smile and said, "You are very powerful, but you made a fatal mistake. You should not have changed your move at the last moment." After saying this, Carl turned his horse around and slowly walked around the arena, receiving the cheers of the audience. On the viewing platform, Colin saw this scene and suddenly turned his head to whisper in Aisha's ear that Joseph lost to Carl Miller on purpose. Although Joseph disguised himself well, he was only a third-grade knight after all. Colin could naturally see through the clues. Half-elves were a mix of humans and elves, so their affinity with the holy light was not high. Therefore, it was difficult for their knight rank to exceed the 3rd grade. Last year, when Colin had come to Silvermoon City, he had seen a few Class 4 half-elven knights. However, after the 2 great upheavals and purges, the Class 4 half-elven kingdom had either fallen or been expelled. Right now, Class 3 half-elven knights were the pinnacle of half-elven strength. Aisha was slightly taken aback when she heard this. Then, she frowned and said in a deep voice, "Could it be that someone threatened Joseph and made him lose on purpose?" Colin gently patted Aisha's arm and shook his head. Not necessarily. The Miller family had just gone through a big change, so no one would dare to jump out and cause trouble at this time. Moreover, before this competition, no one would have thought that an unknown wandering knight would actually make it all the way to the finals. Then why did Joseph lose on purpose? Colin looked at Joseph, who was silently lowering his head in the field, and smiled. Joseph lost the match but won his life. Queen Aisha looked at her lover in confusion. Colin smiled and explained, Joseph knew that he was of low birth and could not be compared to Carl, who was born in the royal family. Moreover, Carl was younger and might have a chance to reach the 4th grade in the future. He might even inherit the Miller family's position as Duke. If Joseph won this competition, even if he received your recognition and successfully entered the half-elven noble class, how would he face the enmity of a Duke in the future? Therefore, he might as well lose the competition and let Carl Miller become the champion. This way, he would have already displayed his strength on this stage. Even if he did not receive the champion's reward, when Carl Miller comes to his senses, he would naturally be grateful to Joseph. Queen Aisha listened quietly and nodded. That makes sense. However, looking at your expression, you seem to approve of Joseph's actions? Colin did not hide his thoughts and nodded. He is a smart person. He has strength and knows when to advance and when to retreat. What's even better is that he is of low birth and does not have a family to back him up. He needs to rely on a powerful force. Queen Aisha immediately understood Colin's thoughts. You want him to become the commander of the Silvermoon Guard? Smart. Colin snapped his fingers. The Silvermoon Guard was in the midst of rebuilding, but Colin could not decide on the commander. Although Colin did not intend to rely too much on the half-elves' military strength, he did not wish for Silvermoon City to fall into chaos again. Therefore, the commander of the Silvermoon Guard was of utmost importance. Colin had even thought that if he could not find a suitable candidate, he might as well find a descendant of his blood to be the commander. However, at this moment, Joseph suddenly appeared in front of Colin and gave him a pleasant surprise. Queen Elsa also seemed to think that Joseph was a good choice. She nodded and said, "Okay, I will send someone to investigate Joseph's background. If there are no problems, I will announce it publicly after a while." All right. As they spoke, the champion knight of the day, Carl Miller, had already arrived at the viewing platform. He took the flowers from his squire and looked around. Colin also looked at this young knight curiously, wanting to see which noble lady he would give the flowers to. Who would have thought that the champion knight would go straight to the viewing platform? Then, under the shocked gazes of the crowd, he gave the flowers to Kathy, who was behind Colin. The half-elf maid was caught off guard and froze on the spot. She looked at Colin, not knowing what to do, as if she was asking for her master's help. Colin had no intention of helping at all. Instead, he looked like he was watching a show. At the same time, he looked in the direction of Prince Harrison from the corner of his eye. The Prince of the Empire was so angry that his face turned red. He clenched his fists, as if he was going to rush out and challenge Carl to a duel in the next second. Fortunately, he still had some sense. He knew that he was no match for Carl, so he could only stare at his rival in love. No one knew what he was thinking. Kathy could only accept the flowers in front of her when she had no hope of asking for help. Colin looked at Carl Miller with interest. He suddenly felt that this knight of the Miller family was also a scheming person. However, looking at Kathy's appearance, this Carl was destined to have a one-sided love. And looking at Prince Harrison's appearance, it could only be said that Carl was praying for his own good. Carl obviously did not know that he had inadvertently offended the Prince of the Empire. After giving the flowers, he strode to Queen Aisha and knelt down on one knee. But before the champion knight could speak, the messenger of the eastern region, Viscount Finn, stood up. Colin thought that he was going to fulfill the promised extra reward, but unexpectedly, Viscount Finn said, "It was a very exciting match. However, Carl, I still have a knight on my side who missed the registration time of the tournament and couldn't participate in the tournament. It's a pity, but he really wants to spar with you. I wonder if you're willing?" Queen Aisha frowned and said decisively, "I'm sorry, Viscount Finn, the tournament is over." "Your Majesty, of course I understand that. However, the reward I just offered, according to the instructions of the Duke of St. Prospero, must be given to the most powerful half-elf knight. I wonder if Carl is willing to prove himself?" Colin narrowed his eyes and said, "So you're saying that the knight you're recommending is also a half-elf?" Viscount Finn nodded and waved behind him. Then, a guard who accompanied him came to the viewing platform and took off his helmet. When he saw his face clearly, Colin was shocked. Carl Miller had already said in a clear voice, "Your Majesty, please allow me to accept this battle for you." Queen Aisha also recognized the identity of the half-elf knight from the eastern region. She turned to look at Colin and saw him nod slightly. "Good. Carl, I hope you can prove yourself again." Chapter 4:14. In the arena, the two knights were standing on opposite ends, preparing for the battle. Carl Miller still had a confident smile on his face, as if he had absolute confidence in the upcoming battle. The audience shouted Knight Carl's name loudly, and their enthusiasm was even higher than in the previous game. Because this time, Knight Carl's opponent was a traitor to the half-elven kingdom. Viscount Omar. Oh no, Queen Aisha had already announced that she had stripped him of his title, so now he could only be called Knight Omar. More than a year ago, when Colin arranged for Vera to fake her death to get out of her engagement with Prince Tup, the Earl of Avon and his sister Anna were imprisoned by the old king. He was going to hand them over to the northern frontier as scapegoats in exchange for the Duke of St. Hilda's forgiveness. But it was Knight Omar who took advantage of the Savoy family's rebellion to sneak into the palace prison and release the Earl of Avon and his sister without authorization. Colin clearly remembered that he had just been promoted to the Fourth Order at that time. He had revealed his true body of the Blood Clan and was looking for Vera in the palace. However, he had bumped into Knight Omar and his two companions outside the back garden. At that time, he had also fought with the Earl of Avon and his sister, as well as Knight Omar. Although he had won, Colin had let the three of them go because he did not want to offend the House of St. Prospero too much. He did not expect that the half-elven traitor, Knight Omar, would actually return to Silvermoon City. Although he did not know why the East sent Knight Omar to cause trouble in the tournament, his strong attitude was completely different from the last time Viscount Fines came to Silvermoon City. This meant that the East should have confirmed the death of Marquis Vincent, and most likely had already formulated a revenge plan. Colin rubbed his chin and suddenly had some expectations for this. While he was deep in thought, the battle on the field had officially begun. In the rumbling sound of horse hooves, The two half-elven knights had already begun their sprint. Colin's attention returned to the front, but when he saw the strong holy light emitted from Omar, his heart suddenly thumped. Omar was a knight of the 4th step. Colin clearly remembered that the other party was still a rank 3 knight when he fought with him a year ago. He didn't expect that the other party would advance in just a year. Apart from Colin, the person who could feel Omar's sudden increase in strength the most was his opponent, Knight Carl. If it was said that this young knight was still full of confidence at first, thinking that he could definitely defeat this notorious half-elf traitor and raise his reputation to another level, but now, as he faced the terrifying pressure that was almost tangible, Carl realized that something was wrong. Fortunately, Carl was also clear that retreating was no longer an option. He could only face it head-on and use all his courage and faith to strive for a miracle. Bang! The two knights finally crashed into each other without any fancy moves. At the same time, the lance broke into countless pieces of wood. The two warhorses crossed each other. Knight Omar sat steadily on the back of his horse, but his opponent, Knight Carl, had already fallen to the ground in a daze. Dark red blood gushed out from the gap in the helmet, forming a small puddle on the ground in an instant. For a moment, the field was silent. Only the doctor, who had been waiting by the side of the field, rushed over and hurriedly removed Knight Carl's helmet and breastplate, only to find that the young knight, who had been proud of himself just a moment ago, had his entire chest caved in due to the huge impact. The doctor reached out and touched Knight Carl's chest for a while, then sighed and shook his head. On the viewing platform, the half-elven nobles watched all this with their mouths agape. Clearly, they had yet to recover from the shock. The most outstanding young descendant of the Miller family, the champion knight of the tournament, and the most likely to become Duke Miller, Carl Miller, had died at the hands of a half-elf traitor. The half-elf maid, Kathy, was still holding the flowers that Knight Carl had given her, but she had never thought that the person who had given her the flowers had already turned into a corpse. Prince Harrison was also very confused. His love rival had died just like that? He had just been thinking about how to cut off Knight Carl's thoughts about Kathy. Who knew that in the blink of an eye, his love rival had been dealt with? The affairs of the world were unpredictable and unpredictable. It was truly impossible to predict. At this moment, the messenger of the eastern region, Viscount Finn, slowly stood up. He put on a sad expression and pretended to say, "Your Majesty, I deeply regret Knight Carl's misfortune. However, this also means that he is not the strongest half-elf knight. Therefore, I can only give this sword to Knight Omar. Of course, it's still up to you to decide who you want to give the reward for the champion of this tournament." Queen Aisha stared coldly at Viscount Finn, her heart burning with anger. Who else could she give the reward to? Could it be that she would give it to a dead person? Just as Viscount Finn was about to give the sword of Marquis Garcia to Knight Omar, Colin suddenly stood up and stopped him. "Wait a minute, Viscount Finn. Count Angeli, what other questions do you have?" Colin did not seem to be angry that the champion of the tournament had been killed by the half-elf knight sent by the eastern region. At this moment he still had a smile on his face and said, "I also have a personal guard on my side who wants to compete with Knight Omar." Viscount Finn smiled faintly and said, "Your Excellency, I know that there are many experts in the northern frontier. Knight Omar has never dared to think of competing with the experts of the northern frontier." No. Colin shook his head and said, "My personal guard is not from the northern frontier, but a half-elf." Viscount Finn was stunned. Colin continued, "Viscount Finn, didn't you just say that the knight sword was to be rewarded to the strongest half-elf knight? Before defeating my personal guard, I'm afraid that Knight Omar is not worthy of this title." Viscount Finn stopped smiling and asked in a deep voice, "May I know who your personal guard is?" Colin smiled and clapped his hands. Then, a personal guard covered in armor strode up to the viewing platform from behind. He first bowed to Colin and Aisha, then slowly took off his helmet. "Duke of Lute." Immediately, exclamations sounded from all directions. Everyone present recognized that this personal guard of Count Angeli was the former half-elf national uncle, the commander of the Silver Moon Guard, Insvar Duke of Lute. Viscount Finn could not believe his eyes and asked foolishly, "Lou, Duke of Lute, hasn't Hasn't he been executed? Colin explained with a smile. The Duke of Lute was stripped of his title and sentenced to death by Her Majesty the Queen a year ago for participating in the Savoy family's rebellion. However, the benevolent Her Majesty the Queen spared Insfar Lute's life and expelled him from the country on account of his great contributions to the half-elf kingdom after all, and his participation in the rebellion was also coerced by the Savoy family. I took in Insfar Lute's outstanding martial arts and rare talent, so I took him in as an ordinary personal guard. I also wanted him to atone for his past mistakes. After Colin's explanation, Viscount Finn still had a look of disbelief on his face. In his opinion, Insfar Lute hated Colin to the bone. How could he be willing to become his personal guard? And how could Colin dare to keep such an enemy by his side to protect his safety? But before he could regain his senses, Insfar Lute had already walked in front of Knight Omar. Without saying a word, he took off his chain gloves and threw them over. Knight Omar was also dumbfounded, because this was an invitation to a duel. Chapter 4:15. Uncle. The Lord of Alfalfa City, Ron Lute, could not help but shout. However, the former Duke of Lute, who was now Ensfa Lute's personal guard, did not seem to hear his nephew's voice. He just stared at Knight Omar in front of him, waiting for the other party's response. Ron Lute's heart was burning with anxiety. This uncle who had come back from the dead was once the pillar of the Lute family. Now that the family had declined, they could only hide in Alfalfa City and bitterly support themselves. When Ron saw Ensfa Lute at this moment, it was naturally as if he had seen a life-saving straw. However, this life-saving straw was going to duel with a powerful half-elf knight. This made Ron feel like he had fallen from heaven to hell again. In a hurry, he could not help but remind his uncle. However, seeing that his uncle did not pay attention to him at all, Ron did not dare to say anything more. He did not dare to persuade his uncle not to duel with Knight Omar. After all, this was Count Angeli's arrangement. If he ruined Count Angeli's plan, the fate of the Lute family would only be more miserable. Knight Omar looked at the chain gloves on the ground in front of him. He did not immediately pick them up. Instead, he stood there stupidly. It must be known that Ensfa Lute was able to become the former half-elf duke and the commander of the Silver Moon Guard. It was not because of his identity as the king's uncle, but because of his powerful strength that surpassed the half-elf kingdom. Even if Omar himself had now advanced to the 4th rank, when facing the former number 1 knight of the half-elf kingdom, he was still a little afraid. What's more, this was a duel to the death. Omar looked at Ensfa Lute's cold eyes in front of him and had already thought of retreating. He had actually fought with Knight Ensfa before and knew how powerful he was. He also knew that even if he had now advanced to the 4th rank, he might not be a match for him. However, at this time, even if he did not want to fight, Colin would not let him leave so easily. Knight Omar, don't you want to prove that you are the strongest half-elf knight? What? You don't dare to accept Knight Ensfa's challenge? Omar was still hesitating, but then he saw the cold eyes of Viscount Fines. At this time, he finally realized that he had no way out. As a traitor to the half-elves, if Omar lost the support of the eastern region, then the best ending for him would be to become a fugitive. So, Omar took a deep breath and bent down to pick up the gloves on the ground. Raising his head again, Knight Omar could clearly see a hint of mockery in Knight Insfar's eyes. It was as if he was mocking him, but also as if he was looking down on him. Omar only felt a surge of anger rush to his head. At this moment, he finally let go of the cowardice and hesitation in his heart. He only wanted to wash away the shame of the past. Come on, Ensfa Ruda. Let me see if you've improved in the past 2 years. Unlike Knight Omar's violence, Knight Enzi was as calm as a pool of stagnant water, as if he didn't realize that he was about to engage in a duel to the death. However, when the duel officially began, Knight Insfar suddenly went from extreme stillness to extreme movement. Boom! The moment Knight Insfar stepped on the ground suddenly exploded. Under the explosive force, Insfar, who was more than 2 meters tall, charged towards the opponent like a giant tank. Knight Omar felt a strong threat, and a sense of danger that made his whole body tremble welled up in his heart. In an instant, Knight Omar didn't dare to hold back. Without hesitation, he activated his strongest state. Holy light spread out from his chest like flowing water, and even the heavy sword in his hand lit up with holy light. The Knight Omar roared, and the heavy sword in his hand glowed with holy light as he swung it towards Insfar's head. But the moment the two were about to collide, Omar suddenly changed his move. His body twisted a few times like a fish, and not only did he avoid Insfar's fatal blow, he also stabbed his long sword towards Insfar's right hand, the hand without the chain glove. Poochie! Blood splattered everywhere, and 2 fingers fell to the ground. Although Knight Omar was also knocked to the ground, and his chest was burning with pain, he was ecstatic because Insfar could no longer hold his weapon after his fingers were cut off. Thus, he lowered his head and flipped to the side, circling behind Insfar. The heavy sword in his hand glowed with white light, and under the huge impact, he ruthlessly stabbed into Insfar's lower back. Insfar didn't seem to be affected at all. Although he couldn't hold the long sword in his hand, he still turned around and threw out a punch. The huge fist, accompanied by the spikes on the vambrace, swept down like a stone pillar. This attack was extremely fast, and Knight Omar was still thinking about stabbing the heavy sword deeper. He was caught off guard and could only let go of the hilt to take it head-on. Bang! The armor on Knight Omar's arm immediately caved in under the huge impact, and sparks flew everywhere. He maintained a defensive posture and slid a few meters away, leaving 2 black scorch marks under his feet. Without waiting for him to catch his breath, Insfar's second punch came down. Boom! Knight Omar half knelt on the ground, and blood spurted out from his knees. His arms were in front of him, blocking the huge blood-red fist in front of him. "Ah!" Omar roared and rolled to the side to avoid the fist. He then got up and flew past Knight Enzi's waist, grabbing the hilt of the heavy sword that had pierced into his waist in midair. Insfar threw another punch at him, which was blocked by Knight Omar's half of the heavy sword. Bang! The huge force crashed into the heavy sword like a flood, and the heavy sword ruthlessly cut open Insfar's armor with a crash, opening a hideous wound at his waist. Although Omar was also sent flying and spat out blood again, he couldn't help but laugh wildly. This was because he realized that although Insfar's strength was still unrivaled, his technique had deteriorated greatly, and he seemed to be mentally unstable. How could a normal person continue to punch when they saw the heavy sword at their waist? This was clearly killing 800 enemies and injuring 1,000 oneself. But the next second, Knight Omar's smile froze on his face. This was because Insfar, whose waist was almost cut in half, didn't seem to care about the fatal injuries on his body, and charged forward again as if nothing had happened. Bang! The ear-piercing sound of metal twisting was accompanied by the chilling sound of bones cracking. Knight Omar let out a painful howl because he was shocked to find that his arm had been smashed off. Insfar didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. He didn't care about the terrifying injury at his waist and used all his strength, smashing fist after fist into Knight Omar's chest. Bang! 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 Every punch would cause blood to spurt out, and at the same time, the sound of bones cracking could be heard. Knight Omar was still begging for mercy at first, but gradually he couldn't make a sound anymore. Bang! Bang! Insfar was still punching downwards, the blood and flesh splattering all over his armor, making him look like a demon that had crawled out of hell. Knight Omar was now a bloody mess, but Insfar didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. The scene was completely silent. This extremely tragic duel scene made everyone dumbfounded. Until Colin raised his hand slightly and said softly, "It's done." Only then did Insfar stop smashing. He slowly got up and walked towards the viewing platform. The strong smell of blood filled the air, causing the half-elven nobles on the stage to shrink back uncontrollably. Viscount Fines tried his best to remain calm, but when he saw Insfar walking towards him step by step, he couldn't help but tremble slightly. Finally, this terrifying knight covered in blood stopped in front of Viscount Fines and directly took away the sword of Marquis Garcia. Throughout the entire process, Viscount Fines stood there stiffly, not daring to move. Chapter 416. The night of the tournament was destined to be a night of revelry. Hundreds of bonfires were set up by the Crystal River. Skinned cattle and sheep were slowly rotating on the barbecue rack. Drops of grease splashed into the bonfire, causing clusters of flames to jump up. Spices and salt were applied, and an alluring aroma instantly filled the surrounding air. Long tables were set up around the bonfires, and vegetables, fruits, and bread were piled on top of them. Tens of thousands of half-elves sat around the bonfires, enjoying the free food and wine provided by Queen Aisha while discussing the events that happened during the day. Some were sighing for Carl Miller, some were cursing the half-elven traitor Omar, saying that he deserved it, and some were arguing about who the champion of the tournament would be, but no one was talking about Ensfalut. This former Duke Lut's performance in killing Knight Omar in the martial arts competition today was very satisfying, but it made the half-elves shiver when they thought about it. That kind of indifference to the lives of others, and even to their own, was no different from the devil. The current lively atmosphere was not suitable for talking about such creepy things. They should eat roasted meat, drink wine, and enjoy the happy time of the hunting festival. The half-elven nobles would of course not crowd with the commoners at the picnic. Their own banquet was held in the half-elven palace. Hundreds of fish oil candles lit up the elegant and gorgeous banquet hall as bright as day. Hundreds of half-elven nobles and guests gathered in the hall, quietly waiting for the banquet to begin. The wine and food had been prepared, and the enticing aroma floated in the air. But the nobles and guests present stood with their hands by their sides, looking at the center of the hall. There, Queen Aisha was wearing a gorgeous palace dress, revealing her white, jade-like right shoulder and a pair of well-proportioned and moist arms. A purple belt accentuated her slender waist, and she did not look like a mother who had just given birth. Her green hair was woven into a complicated and gorgeous style, decorated with sparkling diamonds and silver hairpins. Under the illumination of the candlelight, it emitted an enchanting glow. At this moment, she was holding a knight's sword, resting it on the shoulder of Knight Joseph, who was half kneeling in front of her. "Joseph Palone, are you willing to pledge your loyalty to me?" Knight Joseph, the runner-up of the tournament, could no longer maintain his calm demeanor. He raised his head and looked at the dazzling Queen Aisha. "I, Joseph Perrin, offer my unparalleled loyalty to the great blood-stained thorn, Her Majesty Aisha Miller. As long as I live, your will be my goal, and your instructions will be my belief. I swear in the name of the ancestors of the Perrin family that I will be loyal to you forever." The Perron family wasn't a prominent family in the half-elf kingdom. They had even fallen to the point where they had lost their noble title. However, the illegitimate son of such a fallen family, Joseph Palone, actually became the champion of the martial arts tournament. The half-elf nobles watching the ceremony were extremely envious of Joseph's good luck. They believed that if the real champion, Knight Carl Miller, had not died tragically at the hands of Knight Omar, Joseph would not have been able to enjoy such glory. However, only a few people knew that Joseph's strength was not below Carl Miller's. Looking at this scene, Collins suddenly thought that if Joseph had not chosen to give the championship to Carl Miller at the last moment, perhaps the one who died at the hands of Knight Omar would have been himself. It seemed that this Knight Joseph was really a good person will be rewarded. I, the ruler of the half-elf kingdom, Aisha Miller, in the name of the Queen, confer Joseph Palone the title of Viscounts of the half-elf kingdom. From today onwards, the Palone family will be the hereditary Viscounts of the half-elf kingdom. After saying this, Queen Aisha returned the sword to Viscounts Palone. At the same time, she took out a seal from a tray held by a servant and said, "Viscounts Joseph Palone, in the name of the half-elf queen, I appoint you as the commander of the Silver Moon Guard. I hope that you will shoulder the responsibility of protecting the half-elf kingdom under the gaze of the Supreme Lord." This appointment was out of everyone's expectations. They never thought that the half-elf queen would give such an important position as the commander of the Silver Moon Guard to a person of low birth who had just stepped into the circle of half-elf nobles. In comparison, even the queen directly skipping the title of Baron and conferring the title of Viscounts to Joseph Palone did not seem so abrupt. Joseph Palone didn't expect that Queen Elsa would hand over such a heavy responsibility to him. While he was shocked, he seemed to have understood something. A determined look appeared on his bronze face, and he said in a deep voice, "That's right. I, Joseph Polone, swear in this sacred place under the gaze of the Supreme Lord. From today onwards, until my death, I will use my glory, my life, and my everything to protect the half-elf kingdom. At this moment, some of the smarter half-elf nobles finally understood why Queen Aisha chose a knight with no background to be the commander of the Silver Moon Guard. Without a doubt, a dazzling star was rising in the half-elf kingdom at an astonishing speed. With the rise of the Viscounts Polone, the situation in the half-elf kingdom would change drastically. The rise of a new force would cause the decline of the old forces. Also, this was the will of Queen Aisha and Count Angeli, and no one could stop it. After realizing this, many of the half-elf nobles present became nervous. Even if Queen Aisha officially announced the start of the banquet, they would not be able to regain their happy mood. Queen Aisha obviously did not care about the worries of the old nobles. After experiencing 2 rebellions and purges, it was time for the Silver Moon City to have some new faces. The Silver Moon Guard is currently reducing the number of troops. We need to eliminate the old and weak so that we can get some new blood. You have just taken over, so don't be anxious. First, familiarize yourself with the situation and get to know the generals in the army. As for the future development of the Silver Moon Guard, I will tell you later. Queen Aisha briefly explained the relevant matters of the Silver Moon Guard to the Viscounts Polone. Then she walked elegantly to Colin's side and grabbed his arm. The Viscounts Polone, who was talking to Colin, paused for a moment, but he immediately looked away and pretended not to see it. He continued, "Your Majesty, Count Angeli, I reported your intentions to the Duke of St. Prospero when I returned last time. After some consideration, the Duke has decided to agree to your plan of using the warships to redeem Marquis Vincent. However, the number and tonnage of the warships still need to be further discussed." Colin looked at the Viscounts Polone with a smile on his face and said casually, all right, since that's the case, let's discuss it slowly." The Viscounts Polone still wanted to speak, but Colin had already turned his head to whisper to Queen Aisha. At the same time, the two of them turned around hand in hand intimately, as if they did not intend to talk to the Viscounts Polone anymore. The Viscounts Polone had no choice but to shut his mouth again. The other party's disregard made him furious, but he did not dare to flare up. This trip to Silver Moon City did not go as smoothly as he had expected. However, the Viscounts Polone was not too anxious. According to the instructions of the Duke of St. Prospero, he still had plenty of time. Chapter 417. Teacher, can I have a dance with you? Princess Judy, with her hands behind her back, timidly stood in front of Colin and shyly asked. Colin quietly rolled his eyes. Of course, he knew that this strange princess was deliberately pretending to be shy, but he didn't know what she was planning this time. At this time, the mealtime had passed and the attendants had already cleaned up the table. The band had also changed to a melodious dance music, waiting for the host of the night to lead the first dance. Colin originally wanted to have the first dance with Aisha, but now that Princess Judy had taken the initiative to invite him, as a gentleman, of course he couldn't refuse. And Queen Aisha wasn't angry with Princess Judy. She even smiled and handed Colin's hand to Judy. Colin took Princess Judy's hand and looked at the little girl wearing a white princess dress. He suddenly discovered that she already had the appearance of a young lady. Her skin was as white as snow, her facial features were delicate, and her golden hair was draped over her white shoulders. The silk dress outlined her exquisite body, and her slender jade-like legs were exposed outside the dress, glowing with a moist luster and full of vitality. 2 shallow dimples appeared on her bright and beautiful face, and her pair of beautiful eyes were filled with smiles. Teacher, you don't seem to be very willing to have the first dance with me. Of course not. Colin gathered his thoughts and led Princess Judy to the center of the hall. Then he took her into his arms and began to rotate to the beat of the music. Patter! The delicate crystal shoes heavily stepped on the marble floor, making a discordant sound. Colin, who had just dodged the step, shook his head and said, "You won't step on me, dance properly?" Princess Judy pouted unconvinced, but she also knew that it was impossible for her to step on a high-order knight. She rolled her big bright eyes and suddenly whispered, Don't worry. Teacher, I discovered a secret of my brother. Do you want to hear it? Colin looked down at the little girl in front of him and said with a smile, You didn't discover the matter between him and Kathy, did you? Teacher, you already knew. Yes. Princess Judy was silent for a moment before asking, Then how could the teacher allow this to happen? Big Brother is the first successor of the royal family, but Kathy is a half-elf, and a maid at that. What's the hurry? It's not like your brother is going to marry Kathy. Let him experience the taste of love. But what if they have a baby? What are we going to do? He's just an illegitimate child. Doesn't your father have a bunch of illegitimate children? But father's lovers are all human nobles. Princess Judy said anxiously, Teacher, you don't know, but the blood of the royal family can't flow to outsiders. Is there such a rule? Colin asked doubtfully. Princess Judy nodded seriously. The first emperor, His Majesty Ghania, made the rule himself. The bloodline of San Lorenzo must not be passed to outsiders. How would I know? Colin frowned and fell into deep thought. This was actually a strange rule. After all, other paladin families could intermarry with outsiders. For example, the House of St. Hilda had married their daughters to trolls many times, and even Vera almost married the half-elf prince. So why was the San Lorenzo family not allowed to intermarry with outsiders, and they couldn't even have illegitimate children? Bloodline? Wasn't the bloodline of the San Lorenzo family also the bloodline of the paladins? Seeing that Colin didn't speak, Princess Judy was a little anxious, and she shouted, Teacher. Colin came back to his senses, but he still didn't care too much. He casually said, What's the hurry? Just let them take contraceptive measures. In fact, in this era, there were already contraceptive measures, such as the intestines of some animals, and some special drugs. In short, if he didn't want Prince Harrison and Kathy to have a crystallization of love, it was not a difficult thing to do. Really? There are contraceptive measures? Princess Judy blinked her big shining eyes and asked curiously. Children shouldn't ask too much. Colin didn't explain much. He was thinking that he would have to tell Harrison to pay attention to this point later. If there really was a human life, it would be really difficult to deal with. Princess Judy snorted and asked again, Then with contraceptive measures, can brother and Kathy be together? As long as they don't get married, of course it's up to them, Colin replied casually. Okay, I understand. Princess Judy nodded and said no more. When the song ended, Colin brought the little girl to a stop. He suddenly said, Harrison sent you to test me, didn't he? Princess Judy's body trembled slightly, and she lowered her head to avoid Colin's gaze. She said guiltily, Of course not. Colin smiled faintly and didn't pester the little girl. He let go of her and let her run away. Just as Colin was about to talk to Prince Harrison, Queen Aisha suddenly walked over. Colin grabbed Aisha's hand and was about to explain, but Aisha had already handed him a letter. She lowered her voice and said, Don't worry. I just received the letter from Austere City. Colin hurriedly took the letter and opened it. Then, his expression changed instantly. Seeing this, Aisha asked softly, What's wrong? Colin handed the letter over. Aisha took it and found that there was only a simple sentence on it. There are changes in the western region. Return quickly. And there was no signature or emblem. As if seeing Aisha's doubts, Colin explained softly, This is Archbishop Ajani's handwriting. Aisha nodded and asked, What's going on in the western region? Is there a problem with the Orc expedition army? I'm afraid so. Colin's heart was a little heavy. When he was in Imperial Dragon City, he knew that the western region had sent an expedition army to the Orc territory. But at that time, whether it was the royal family or the Prime Minister, they were full of confidence in this expedition and didn't even send an army to support. But unexpectedly, something happened. The orcs on the west side of the Broken Sky Mountains were definitely a great threat to the Radiant Empire, especially when they completed the unification and successfully formed the Orc Empire. Although Vera and Marquis Garcia hadn't sent a letter yet, Colin knew that Ajani wouldn't joke about this kind of thing. Moreover, the Church's speed of obtaining information was definitely faster than the Lord's. So, Colin knew that he couldn't stay in Silvery Moon City for long. Queen Aisha also thought of this and asked, "The plan against the eastern region. Is that it?" Colin pondered for a moment and gritted his teeth. "No. We've been preparing for this for so long. How can we give up at the last minute? What's more, I've said long ago that we must settle this account with the House of St. Prospero." Aisha frowned and advised, "But if the orcs are really about to invade, I'm afraid the timing isn't too good." "It doesn't matter, let's end this quickly." Colin immediately made up his mind. Moreover, the orc invasion is an excellent reason to confuse the eastern region. But before, we pretended to be leisurely to lure the eastern region. If we suddenly show urgency now, the eastern region will definitely realize that there's a problem. Colin pondered for a moment. Suddenly, he saw Prince Harrison holding Kathy's hand as they walked onto the dance floor. He smiled and said, "I have an idea." Chapter 418. It was already late at night, and the hunting festival banquet finally came to an end. The guests left one after another. Viscount Finn also bid farewell to Queen Aisha. Just as he was about to leave, he was stopped by an attendant. "Viscounts, His Highness Prince Harrison invites you to attend the tea party later." Viscount Finn turned around in surprise and saw Prince Harrison looking at him from not far away. He hurriedly nodded his head in greeting and then said to the attendant, "Okay, it's my honor." Then, Viscount Finn was led to a reception room by the attendant. The interior of the hall was luxuriously decorated with a distinctive style. There were 3 crystal candlesticks hanging from the ceiling. The candlelight was refracted through the pure crystal and became dazzling, filling every corner of the reception room. Before Prince Harrison arrived, Viscount Finn walked around the hall casually, admiring the specimens of the ferocious beasts' heads and the unique decorative weapons hanging on the wall with great interest. This kind of bold and luxurious style was obviously not in line with the temperament of a half-elf noble. It seemed that it had been specially modified for Prince Harrison. Thinking about how this prince of the empire had just personally hunted a brown bear at the hunting party, it meant that although this young prince looked quiet on the outside, he had a martial heart. While he was thinking, Viscount Finn heard footsteps approaching. He quickly turned around and saw Prince Harrison walking in. "Your Highness, Count Angeli?" Viscount Finn thought that Prince Harrison had invited him alone, but he did not expect that Colin Angeli would also be there. However, he was not too surprised. After all, Colin was Prince Harrison's teacher. He reckoned that this private meeting was not Prince Harrison who wanted to see him, but Colin. Viscount Finn had a few thoughts in his mind in an instant, but on the surface, he bowed and greeted the 2 people who came in elegantly and indifferently. Prince Harrison sat down on the main seat. Then, the half-elf maids quickly walked in and served the 3 of them flower tea and honey. Viscount Finn tasted the flower tea in his hand. From time to time, he would peek at Colin from the corner of his eye, trying to see some clues from his face. Unfortunately, he didn't find anything. Prince Harrison put down his teacup, cleared his throat, and said in a slightly immature voice, "I'm sorry. Count Angeli, Viscount Fine, I invited you here to tell you some bad news." Viscount Finn's heart skipped a beat. He quickly looked at Colin and saw that he was also puzzled. He continued to listen to Prince Harrison. "I just received a letter from Imperial Dragon City. The expeditionary force sent by the western region to the west of the Broken Sky mountain range met with an accident. The Radiant Empire is likely to face the threat of the orcs again." "What?" Viscount Fines was obviously shocked by this news and could not help but exclaim. At this moment, he no longer cared about the conflict with the northern frontier. He immediately asked, "Your Highness, has the Orc Empire been unified again?" Colin also had a shocked expression on his face as he asked in a deep voice, "How many casualties did the Western Expeditionary Army suffer? What about the Duke of Sangre? How is she now?" Prince Harrison's eyes flashed. He coughed lightly and said, "I'm not sure about the specific situation right now, but my father has asked me to return to Imperial Dragon City immediately. But before I leave, I hope that the eastern region and the northern frontier can resolve some misunderstandings and conflicts. After all, the threat of the orcs is too great. The lords of the Radiant Empire need to unite and cooperate sincerely to survive this disaster together." Viscount Finn gradually calmed down from his shock. His first thought was, could this be a conspiracy by the northern frontier? After all, Colin Angeli was Prince Harrison's teacher. Would he deliberately instruct Prince Harrison to deceive the eastern region with fake news? But soon, Viscount Finn denied this guess. First of all, fake news was too easy to be exposed. The House of St. Prospero was not stupid. They would definitely verify it themselves. Secondly, according to the Earl of Avon's previous inference, Colin Angeli's strategy at this time should be to stall for time and wait for the support of the Northern Frontier Army to arrive at Silver Moon City. Then, he would have a showdown with the Eastern region and announce the death of Marquis Vincent. In this way, even if the Eastern region wanted to take revenge, they would not dare to cross the Raging Water River and fight the Northern Frontier Army in the Half-Elf Kingdom. The House of St. Prospero could only helplessly accept this humiliating result. Therefore, this time, Viscount Finn's attitude was tough as soon as he came on this diplomatic trip. He even deliberately caused trouble at the hunting party because he knew that Colin Angelo was just bluffing at this time. Before the army of the northern region arrived, he did not dare to fall out with the eastern region. Thinking about it this way, Colin Angeli did not need to make up such a lie that was very likely to be exposed to forcibly stop the eastern region's revenge. However, if the orcs were really about to invade, it would really be a great help to the northern frontier. A trace of worry rose in Viscount Finn's heart. He raised his head and looked at Colin Angeli opposite him, but he saw that the other party's face was also dignified. It seemed that the news of the orcs had also caught him off guard. Therefore, Viscount Finn said tentatively, "Your Highness, as I have always reiterated before, the eastern region has no intention to be enemies with the northern frontier or the half-elf kingdom, not to mention now that the enemy is in front of us. Of course, we are willing to work hard to eliminate the misunderstanding between the two sides and reach a settlement. Therefore, as long as Count Angeli agrees to release Marquis Vincent, we will not take the initiative to provoke and cause more trouble." Prince Harrison nodded with satisfaction, then turned his gaze to his teacher. Colin's face was gloomy, and he said coldly, "Marquis Vincent's actions in Silvermoon City have caused great harm to the northern frontier and the half-elves. If the eastern region does not have enough sincerity, I will not let him go so easily." Viscount Finn immediately said, "My lord, the Duke of St. Prospero has already said that he is willing to exchange 3 heavy warships, 50 paddle warships, and 100 logistics transport ships for Marquis Vincent." "Not enough," Colin said flatly. Viscount Finn sneered in his heart. He felt that at this time, the Count of the Northern Frontier was still stubbornly holding on, so he said with a troubled expression, "My lord, this is already the greatest sincerity that the eastern region can give. Add 3 more heavy warships and 20 more transport ships?" Viscount Finn pondered for a moment, and then, as if he had made a great decision, he said, "Well, my lord, I will go back and report to the Duke of St. Prospero. I hope he will agree." Prince Harrison hurriedly said, "Please hurry. After all, the situation in the western region is critical. We must solve this problem as soon as possible." "Yes, Your Highness." Viscount Finn bowed to Prince Harrison. Then, without further delay, he immediately turned around and left. After Viscount Finn's back disappeared from the hall, Prince Harrison stood up and moved to Colin's side, asking, "Teacher, how was my performance?" "Not bad." Colin patted Prince Harrison's shoulder with a smile. Prince Harrison's face lit up with joy. After a while, he asked, "Teacher, why did you ask me to tell the Easterners this news?" Colin smiled faintly and said, "Because the same news will have a completely different effect on different people." Prince Harrison frowned, as if he couldn't fully understand his teacher's intention. He hesitated for a moment and was about to ask again, but he heard Colin say, "Look more, think more, and ask less. Because the answer you get is likely to be a lie, but a person's actions can't be faked." "Yes, teacher." Prince Harrison nodded thoughtfully. Chapter 419. Alfalfa City. The garden behind the Cathedral of Holy Light was filled with the faint aroma of black tea. The Earl of Avon looked at the slightly bleak yet undefeated late autumn scenery in the garden and said, "Look, There must be hundreds of flowers blooming here in the summer, but they disappear in the blink of an eye. No matter how beautiful the flowers are, they will only last for a summer. What's the difference between people? He put down the teacup in his hand and sighed. It was unknown whether he was lamenting the withering of the flowers or the impermanence of life. Orlando, who had just taken over as the president of the Alfalfa Brotherhood, sat respectfully to the side. His brain was working so fast that it almost turned into a whirlpool. He carefully considered every word and sentence of the Earl of Avon, hoping to make the most appropriate response. The Earl of Avon continued, "Sometimes I admire the gardeners. They always manage this place beautifully according to the different seasons, so that this garden presents a completely different beauty in different seasons." Orlando understood tacitly and immediately said in the most sincere tone, "My lord, I am willing to be the most humble gardener under your command and create the most beautiful scenery for you." In the face of Orlando's display of loyalty, the Earl of Avon chuckled and glanced at him. He nodded noncommittally and said, "I know of your talent. It would be a waste of your talent to only be a gardener. Moreover, I don't want the beautiful scenery to be limited to this garden." Orlando blinked and asked tentatively, "My lord, you mean the whole Alfalfa City?" The Earl of Avon nodded and then strolled into the depths of the garden. Orlando hurriedly followed. "I've circled around Alfalfa City a few times and found that many places are already in ruins. The residents here are also destitute and dejected. Moreover, there are cases of swindling, murder, and robbery everywhere. This makes my heart ache. Although this city does not belong to the Eastern region, but after all, there are a large number of Eastern region people living here. I hope that they can live a decent life, and I also hope that this city will no longer be a rotten sore on this land." The Earl of Avon said it so clearly that Orlando certainly understood. But what he didn't understand was why the Eastern region suddenly wanted to regulate Alfalfa City. Even if there were many people from the Eastern region living here, Alfalfa City was still the territory of the half-elf kingdom. Unless, Orlando's heart quivered, and he immediately reacted. Could it be that the Eastern region already had the confidence to occupy Alfalfa City? He knew that Count Angeli was trying to get Marquis Vincent back, but he was not Count Angeli's henchman, so he did not know the details of the plan. However, there was no time for Orlando to think about it. He hurriedly said respectfully, "Count, please rest assured that I will gather the leaders of the Brotherhood as soon as possible and come up with a governing plan for your review. Under your guidance, we will do our best to revitalize this city." The Earl of Avon nodded with satisfaction and waved his hand, indicating that Orlando could leave. Orlando understood, so he bowed and left. The Earl of Avon stood alone in front of an osmanthus tree, smelling the strong fragrance of the flowers. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him again. When he turned around, he saw Viscount Finn walking over in a hurry. The Earl of Avon raised his eyebrows and asked doubtfully, "Why are you back so soon?" Viscount Finn said with a solemn face, "Count, something has happened in the western region. The orcs are likely to invade." The Earl of Avon was obviously shocked by the news. He was stunned for a moment, then asked, "Where did you get the news?" Prince Harrison said it himself, and he also hopes that we can solve the dispute with the northern frontier as soon as possible and unite against the outside world. The Earl of Avon thought for a moment and asked again, "What is Colin Angelo's attitude on your trip to Silver Moon City this time?" "When I first arrived, it was just in time for the hunting festival tournament. I followed your arrangements and sent Knight Omar to cause trouble, but the northern frontier actually pushed out Insfar Lut, the former Duke of Lut of the half-elven kingdom. Yes. He actually didn't die, and he's still working for Colin Angelo. Therefore, I couldn't use this matter to test whether Colin dared to fall out with the Eastern region. However, at the banquet after the festival, I took the initiative to discuss the conditions of redemption with Colin. The other party obviously avoided the topic, and the intention of evading and delaying was obvious." The Earl of Avon nodded and said, "It should be. Colin is feeling guilty now. Then the threat of the orcs this time shouldn't be a conspiracy of the northern frontier, right? It shouldn't be." The Earl of Avon shook his head. "This kind of lie is too easy to expose. However, I will also send a letter to my mother to verify it, just in case. In addition, I just received news this morning that the Golden Lion Legion of the northern frontier suddenly stopped advancing at the border of the half-elven kingdom. I was wondering what the hell they were doing, but now it seems that they must have received news from the western region. Viscount Finn was a little doubtful. We haven't reached a redemption agreement with Silver Moon City yet. How would the Golden Lion Legion dare to stop advancing? It should be Marquis Garcia's order. Marquis Garcia? Yes. The Earl of Avon said confidently. If you carefully understand Marquis Garcia's past, you will understand that he is a staunch externalist who opposes all forms of human civil war. It is precisely because of this that the relationship between the two brothers was tense when the previous Duke of St. Hilda was alive. Marquis Garcia vigorously developed the cavalry and constantly intensified the conflict with the trolls. He also forcibly consumed the power of the northern frontier in the north to prevent the Duke of St. Hilda from having the idea of moving east. Therefore, when the threat of the orcs appeared this time, Marquis Garcia would definitely stop Colin Angelo from mobilizing the Golden Lion Legion to move east at the first opportunity. He might even ask him to immediately lead the Blood Cavalry back to the northern frontier. Viscount Finn's face lit up and he smiled. In that case, the matter of the orcs is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us. That's right. Earl of Avon also became excited and hurriedly asked, "Have you reached an agreement with Colin Angelo after that?" Not yet. Colin Angelo opened his mouth wide and added 3 more heavy warships on the basis of our bottom line. Do you think he is still trying to delay? Agree to him, Earl of Avon ordered without hesitation. No matter what he is thinking, we can't miss this opportunity. Viscount Finn hesitated and said, "Then the Duke of St. Prospero, I will talk to my father. You will rush back to Silver Moon City immediately and represent the House of St. Prospero to sign a redemption agreement with Colin Angelo. Be fast. We must hurry and completely eliminate the threat of Colin Angelo before Emperor Reinhardt issues the war order." Chapter 420. The first rays of the morning sun dyed the horizon with a faint red glow. Within the red glow, several white clouds gently floated past. Tens of thousands of rays of light shone on the calm New Shui River, emitting a faint halo. Everything seemed so tranquil and peaceful. However, the calm was only on the surface. Under the surface, there were countless undercurrents surging. Suddenly, an undercurrent broke through the calm surface of the water, immediately causing a burst of turbulent waves. Whirlpools spread out in the waves and finally disappeared on the surface. Facing the rays of sunlight, a huge fleet appeared on the New Shui River. Their sails were bulging, and under the impact of the undercurrent, the bows of the ships stirred up bursts of snow-white waves. On the flag that fluttered in the wind, there was a picture of a pure white Pegasus spreading its wings. Obviously, this was the navy fleet of the Eastern House of St. Prospero. Although the weakness of the Eastern Army was well known in the Empire of Radiance, no one dared to underestimate the navy fleet of the Eastern Army. This huge fleet consisted of 15 heavy warships, 180 paddle sail warships, 50 light dhow sailboats, and 300 logistics transport ships. It was definitely the most terrifying naval force of the Empire of Radiance. It was also because of this almost invincible fleet and the natural moat of the New Shui River that the Eastern Army had not been invaded for hundreds of years. Even the powerful northern frontier, which had pressed the giant demon empire to the ground, could not cross the New Shui River under the threat of this fleet. At this moment, the flagship White Dew was sailing at the forefront of the fleet. This legendary heavy warship named after the House of St. Prospero was the pride of the Eastern Army. It was also a miracle in the era of wooden warships with sails. This water giant was 80 meters long, 20 meters wide, with a 66-meter keel and a full displacement of 3,000 tons. The ship had 3 floors, and each floor was built with a protective wall that could allow thousands of archers to shoot at the same time. There were 8 huge battering poles on both sides of the ship, and a ferocious bow ram was installed at the bow. In the era of cold weapons, the White Dukes could definitely be called an invincible warship that would never sink. At this time, in the captain's room of the White Dew, almost all the senior officers of the Pegasus Navy fleet were present. The supreme commander of the fleet, Earl Hall, swept his dignified gaze across everyone's faces. Then, he coughed lightly and said loudly, "Everyone, I'm sure you all know the reason why we're heading north this time." That's right, it was to go to Silver Moon City and redeem Marquis Vincent. And the price of redemption. At this point, the corners of Earl Hall's mouth twitched a few times as though he couldn't hide the humiliation and anger in his heart. Thankfully, he quickly calmed down and continued. "Let the Earl of Avon explain the price of redemption in person." Earl of Avon, who was standing behind Earl Hall, smiled and took a step forward. He first nodded at the fleet's officers before opening a goatskin scroll in his hand and reading from it. "Ladies and gentlemen, according to the agreement between the Duke of St. Prospero and Count Angeli, we will use 6 heavy warships, 50 paddle warships, and 120 transport ships to ransom Marquis Vincent." Hearing this, even the Navy officers who had always been disciplined couldn't help but whisper to each other. Clearly, such a price was difficult for everyone to accept. They all cast their gazes at Earl Hall, but the supreme commander of the fleet lowered his head and remained silent. However, Earl Hall's tightly clenched fists still showed that his heart wasn't as calm as he appeared on the surface. Earl of Avon slowly swept his calm but firm gaze across the faces of the officers. Only when the scene quieted down again did he continue reading. "According to the request of the Duke of St. Prospero, the following warships will be handed over to the northern frontier: Braveheart, Victory, Raging Waves, Giant Wave, Windcheam, White Dew. These 6 heavy warships will..." Earl of Avon. Upon hearing this, Earl Hall finally couldn't help but exclaim. He took a step forward and stood in front of the Earl of Avon. His heavy breathing almost hit the young Duke's second son's face. Earl of Avon looked expressionlessly at Earl Hall, who was like an enraged bull, and asked indifferently, "Earl Hall, do you have any questions?" Earl of Avon, "It's not that I can't bear to part with a few warships. In fact, everyone knows that I want to see Marquis Vincent return safely to the eastern region more than anyone else. My daughter looks forward to her husband day and night, and my grandson can't leave his father. But what I want to know is, why are the warships chosen from the Hall family?" "The Hall family's warships?" Earl of Avon sneered and asked without backing down, "Earl Hall, when did the Pegasus Navy become the Hall family's private army?" Of course, the Pegasus Navy isn't the Hall family's private army, but you can't deny the Hall family's contribution to this fleet. Most of our family's income is used to maintain the fleet. The best members of the Hall family, the strongest citizens, all serve in this fleet. Earl of Avon, to say something disrespectful, without the Hall family, the Pegasus Navy's combat power will be reduced by at least half. Earl Hall had already thrown caution to the wind. Earl Evans' actions had already exceeded the bottom line he could bear. If he really handed over these 6 heavy battleships, the Hall family's military strength would be completely finished. Earl of Avon snorted and said unyieldingly, "Earl Hall, I admit the Hall family's contribution to the Pegasus Navy, but ask yourself honestly, when has the House of St. Prospero ever let you do anything for nothing? Have you forgotten that your ancestors were just lowly commoners and rich merchants? Who raised your family's title step by step to that of an earl? Who made you one of the top families in the Eastern region? You even let your daughter marry the heir of the Duke of the Eastern region? The House of St. Prospero has never mistreated the Hall family. Now that we need you, Earl Hall, are you beginning to forget your oath and the grace of the House of St. Prospero? The Hall family has never forgotten our oath. And we will never betray the House of St. Prospero," Earl Hall said loudly and forcefully, but then he changed the topic and said in a deep voice, "But we are also unwilling to be deliberately targeted." Earl of Avon unfolded the parchment in his hand and let Earl Hall see the words on it and the signature of the Duke of St. Prospero. "Look carefully, Earl Hall. This is the order of the Duke of St. Prospero. Are you prepared to disobey it?" Earl Hall stared intently at the parchment and didn't say a word. However, this silence was already a silent protest. Just as Earl of Avon was about to speak again, he suddenly saw a high-ranking officer take a few steps forward and stand behind Earl Hall. This seemed to be a signal. Right on the heels of that, one officer after another from the Hall family came behind Earl Hall. They also lowered their heads in silence, expressing their silent protest to Earl of Avon. The phrase, "the Hall family owns half of the Pegasus Navy," was perfectly interpreted in this scene. However, it was only half. There was another half present. When the officers of the House of St. Prospero saw this, they all stood behind Earl of Avon. The two groups of people faced each other silently. Some of the hot-tempered officers even touched the swords at their waists with their right hands. The air in the cabin became more and more stagnant, gradually becoming suffocating. The situation seemed to have become a string that had been stretched to its limits. It was as if it would completely snap in the next second. Count Elvin looked at Count Hall and the officers behind him expressionlessly. His expression was still calm and composed, as if he didn't realize that a civil war was about to break out in the Pegasus Navy. He asked calmly, "What do you think?" He asked calmly, "Earl Hall, do you wish to betray the House of St. Prospero?" Earl Hall took a deep breath as though he was forcefully suppressing his anger and impulsiveness. He said in a deep voice, "Earl of Avon, I wish to speak to you alone." Sure. Chapter 421. With the departure of the officers, only Earl Hall and Earl of Avon were left in the cabin. The Earl of Avon rolled up the parchment in his hand and casually placed it on the table. Then he picked up a cup of cold coffee and drank it. Earl Hall stood quietly by the side. The flush of anger on his face had subsided, and he seemed to have finally calmed down. However, the determination and resistance in his eyes didn't diminish at all. The Earl of Avon put down his coffee cup and turned to look into Earl Hall's eyes. He asked, "You should have heard some rumors about Marquis Vincent being assassinated in Silver Moon City, right?" Earl Hall nodded. He seemed to realize something as his face suddenly turned extremely pale. Seeing this, the Earl of Avon knew that the other party had guessed it, so he didn't hide it anymore. He sighed and said, "Yes, although the people of the northern frontier have sealed off the news, we still confirmed an unfortunate fact. My dear brother, Marquis Vincent, has died in Silver Moon City." "Impossible!" Earl Hall roared and suddenly became irritable again. His bloodshot eyes stared at the Earl of Avon in front of him as if he wanted to strangle him to death with his gaze. Count Elvin didn't seem to be worried about his own safety at all. His expression was calm and even a little sad as he even said with a hint of sadness, "I also hope that this is fake news, but this is the truth." Colin Angelo was worried that this news would attract revenge from the eastern region, so he sealed the news and deliberately put forward harsh conditions for redemption. He wanted to stall for time and wait for the northern frontier's reinforcements. Unfortunately, news of the orcs suddenly came from the western region. The reinforcements from the northern frontier probably won't be able to reach Silver Moon City. So, Earl Hall, this is also an opportunity for us, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for revenge. Revenge? Earl Hall sneered and said disdainfully, "I think this is a chance for you to completely eliminate the Hall family, right? Eliminate the forces supporting Marquis Vincent and completely control the Pegasus Navy at the same time. Heh, it's killing two birds with one stone." The Earl of Avon shook his head slowly and said, "Purge? No. Almost all the nobles of the eastern region were once my brother's supporters. Do you want me to massacre the eastern region? Earl Hall, in my opinion, this is a chance for your family to prove themselves again." Seeing that Earl of Avon still didn't believe him, Earl of Avon continued, "Father should have already made an official announcement, but you haven't received the news yet. My engagement with Prince Leahy's daughter, Salia, has been annulled, and I've been engaged to Count Bruggen's daughter, Grace." Hall's pupils constricted. Before he could say a word, he heard the Earl of Avon continue. "This is the sincerity of the Bruggen family, and also my attitude. I don't want to purge my brother's former supporters, but to accept them. But, just like the Bruggans, I had to see the sincerity of these supporters to switch sides. Especially you, Lord Hall. I know that your daughter married my brother and bore him a child. Don't worry, I won't make life difficult for a child, and I won't treat the Hall family as an enemy because of this. But there's a prerequisite for this. The Hall family has to prove their loyalty." Earl Hall smiled bitterly and asked, So we can only prove our loyalty through self-destruction? How can it be self-destruction? The Earl of Avon said in surprise. It's just a few warships. As long as the Hall family members are still around, the title is still there, and the territory is still there, it's only a matter of time before they rise again. Moreover, I can solemnly promise you that as long as you complete the mission I give you in the next redemption operation, the position of commander of the Pegasus Navy will still be yours. What mission? The Crystal River has a tributary that leads directly to the half-elven palace in Silver Moon City, but there are 3 sluices in the middle. Earl Hall's expression changed, and he immediately continued, You want me to use the warships delivered to the northern frontier this time to destroy these 3 sluices? Earl Hall couldn't help but sneer as he shook his head and said, Earl of Avon, after all, you haven't commanded a naval battle before. You don't understand how difficult it is to destroy the 3 sluices. Not to mention the 6 heavy warships and the Orsail warships we handed over this time. Even if we were to mobilize the entire Pegasus Navy, we probably wouldn't be able to destroy the 3 sluices. The Earl of Avon smiled mysteriously and turned to the table. He opened a wooden box placed on it and took out a palm-sized clay jar. What if we add this? Earl Hall walked forward in puzzlement, but when he saw the viscous liquid that suffused a green glow in the clay jar, his expression changed drastically as he growled, That's right. He roared, Wildfire? The Earl of Avon nodded. The faint green glow from the clay jar illuminated his handsome face, making him look somewhat ferocious. This time, Father has spent a huge price to buy 3,000 jars of wildfire from Yevil. They will help you destroy all the defenses of the half-elves on the Crystal River. 3,000 jars? Earl Hall's voice changed. These things will destroy my fleet as well. Yes, this was your plan to begin with. The Hall family's warships have long been a pile of ashes in your eyes, right? The Earl of Avon seemed to be somewhat impatient as he said coldly, Earl Hall, you don't really plan on handing those warships over to the northern frontier in perfect condition, do you? Their fate is already sealed. I just want them to bring enough enemies to hell with them before they are destroyed. Earl Hall fell silent. After a while, he said softly, Is this the price the Hall family has to pay? As long as we complete this mission, I can guarantee that the Hall family will still have a place in the eastern region in the future. Earl Hall fell silent again. He had a rough understanding of the Duke of St. Prospero's plan. Under the guise of redeeming Marquis Vincent, he would send a batch of eastern region warships along the Crystal River to Silver Moon City. The reason why the northern frontier had sealed off the news of Marquis Vincent's death was probably because they wanted to wait for the eastern region's warships to arrive before forcefully detaining them and handing over a corpse to the eastern region. However, since the Duke of St. Prospero had already confirmed the news of Marquis Vincent's death, he wanted to beat them at their own game. He secretly filled the warships with wildfire and then used a method of mutual destruction to forcefully break through Silver Moon City's naval defenses. This way, the following naval fleets could drive straight into the half-elven palace. However, Earl Hall was also very clear that the mission given to the Hall family by the Duke of St. Prospero was a suicide attack with a slim chance of survival. After this battle, even if the eastern region successfully captured Silver Moon City, the military power that the Hall family relied on the most would be destroyed. Even Earl Hall himself would most likely die in Silver Moon City. If possible, Earl Hall would definitely not accept this mission. Unfortunately, Marquis Vincent was already dead. The Hall family's greatest backer had fallen. Looking at the arrangements made by the Duke of St. Prospero, it was obvious that he was paving the way for his second son, the Earl of Avon. If the Hall family disobeyed this order, they would definitely not be able to escape the House of St. Prospero's reckoning. Thinking of his clansmen who were still in White Dew City, Earl Hall let out a long sigh. He finally took the jar of wildfire from the Earl of Avon and said in a deep voice, all right, the Hall clan will obey your orders. Chapter 422. The night was low, and the silver moon was high in the sky. Viscount Finn, who had been traveling all the way, finally arrived at Silver Moon City again. The residents of the city had long been immersed in their dreams. The streets paved with bluestones were empty. Other than the night squad patrolling back and forth, there was no one else to be seen. Go to Half-Elven Palace, Viscount Finn instructed the coachman in a tired voice. The coachman said with some embarrassment, "Sir, it's already so late. I'm afraid it's rude to go to the palace." Viscount Finn lifted the curtain and asked coldly, "Are you questioning my orders?" "Oh no." The coachman was so scared that he shrank his head and hurriedly drove the carriage in the direction of Half-Elven Palace. Not long after, the carriage arrived in front of the palace gate. This was Viscount Finn's third visit to Silvermoon City, so the guards at the palace gate naturally recognized him. After careful inspection, they opened the palace gate and let the carriage into the palace. "May I ask if Earl Angeli is resting? If not, I would like to pay my respects to him." "Wait a moment, I'll help you ask." After waiting for a while, the attendant returned with a piece of news that Viscount Finn did not want to hear. "I'm sorry, Earl Angeli has already fallen asleep. I'll take you to the guest room to rest first. I'll help you inform him tomorrow." "Okay." Viscount Finn had no choice but to follow the attendant to his residence. The reason why he was in such a hurry to see Colin was that he wanted to finalize the redemption plan for Marquis Vincent as soon as possible. This way, the Earl of Avon's plan could be implemented as soon as possible. Otherwise, once Emperor Reinhardt's war order reached the eastern region, they would never be able to use force against Silvermoon City again. Otherwise, they would become the public enemy of the nobles of the empire. Therefore, the eastern region was in a race against time. "Sir Viscounts, you can rest here tonight." "Okay." Viscount Finn sent the attendant away, threw his luggage on the coffee table, took off his coat, and lay on the bed. Although Viscount Finn was already exhausted on the way to Silvermoon City, he was not sleepy at all at this moment. After tossing and turning several times, he still couldn't fall asleep. He simply got up and walked to the window, staring at the shadowy courtyard, lost in thought. The pale, cold moonlight enveloped the Half-Elven Palace. As the night wind blew, the shadows in the flowers swayed incessantly, like ghosts baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. For some reason, Viscount Finn felt a little uneasy. As a trusted aide of the Earl of Avon, he certainly knew the contents of the Eastern region's revenge plan. In his opinion, the plan made by the Earl of Avon was perfect, and it would definitely surprise the half-elves and Count Angeli. However, at this moment, fiendish Viscounts suddenly felt that he seemed to have overlooked some important information. With his hands on the beautifully carved window frame and staring at the dark and quiet night, Viscount Finn felt as if he was in an uninhabited wilderness shrouded in fog. He could not see the direction he was going, but there were shadows closing in on him step by step. Anxiety and hesitation surged in his heart uncontrollably. Viscount Finn shook his head and told himself not to think too much. The Earl of Avon's plan would not go wrong. What he needed to do now was to see Colin Angeli as soon as possible and set a redemption plan. Then he could let the Eastern region's fleet enter the Crystal River smoothly and reach Silvermoon City. After closing the window, Viscount Finn returned to the bed and forced himself to close his eyes. However, as soon as he closed his eyes, the worry and anxiety that he had forcefully suppressed emerged again. After tossing and turning for a long time, he still could not fall asleep. Viscount Finn got up again. This time, he did not stare at the dark courtyard and let his imagination run wild. Instead, he put on his clothes and strode out of the room. "Come with me to the palace." Finn woke up the attendant and coachman who were sleeping next door and ordered. The coachman barely opened his sleepy eyes. He kept cursing the damned noble in his heart for being so nosy. However, he did not dare to disobey the order. He could only force himself to pull the carriage over, carry Viscount Finn, and drive towards the palace gate again. When the guard at the palace gate saw Viscount Finn again, he was also confused. "Lord Viscounts, it's so late. Are you still going out of the palace?" "Yes, I couldn't sleep, so I wanted to visit a friend." The guard nodded and did not make things difficult for Viscount Finn. He immediately let him go. After leaving the palace, the carriage went all the way west. Viscount Finn lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked at the quiet street in a daze. Suddenly, another patrol team appeared at the corner of the street. When they saw the badge on the carriage clearly, they did not dare to go forward and ask further. However, Viscount Finn looked at the figure of this patrol team and suddenly realized that he had overlooked something. Blood cavalry? Where was the blood cavalry? Only then did he notice that from the moment he entered Silvermoon City this time, he had not seen the blood cavalry again. Whether it was the guards at the city gate, the patrol team on the streets, or the guards at the palace, they were all half-elven Silvermoon Guard. It seemed to be a matter of course that the Silvermoon Guard guarded Silvermoon City. However, Viscount Finn felt a wave of panic because of this. Why did he not see the blood cavalry? Speed up. Viscount Finn could not help but urge. But the coachman hurriedly waved his whip. The carriage sped up all the way and soon arrived in front of a luxurious villa in the business district. Without waiting for the attendant to report, Viscount Finn jumped out of the carriage and strode inside. The guards of the villa obviously knew Viscount Finn and did not dare to stop him at all. After a few steps, the butler hurriedly ran over and said with an apologetic smile, "Lord Viscounts, it's so late. Master has already fallen asleep. Why don't I get someone to serve you and rest first? Tomorrow morning, I'll inform Master and let him see you." Viscount Finn completely ignored the butler and strode in the direction of the dormitory. The butler's forehead was sweating and he repeatedly advised, Lord Viscounts, Master has really fallen asleep." Bang! Viscount Finn kicked open the door of the dormitory. "Ah!" The two men's screams immediately sounded in the room, followed by Javier's exasperated scolding, "Who is it? Who is it? Finn Viscounts. Why are you here?" After seeing the face of Viscount Finn clearly, the half-elven merchant's scolding was immediately stuck in his throat. Soon, he reacted and hurriedly said with a flattering smile, "Lord, if you like this half-elven manservant, then I'll avoid him first." Please. Viscount Finn ignored Javier's good intentions and coldly ordered the manservant who was curled up at the foot of the bed, "Get out." "Yes." After the half-elven manservant left, Viscount Finn looked at Javier, who was shrinking his head, and asked anxiously, "What about the blood cavalry? And what about Colin Angelo? Are they still in Silvermoon City?" Javier looked at the unfriendly Viscount Finn and stammered, "They don't seem to be here." Viscount Finn grabbed Javier's collar and growled, "What do you mean by seem to be? Are they here or not?" "I really don't know. Viscounts, I only heard that late at night 5 days ago, the city gate was wide open. It seemed that a large number of cavalry troops left Silvermoon City, but I don't know if they were the blood cavalry. However, since then, I haven't seen the blood cavalry in the city." Viscount Finn felt a chill envelop his entire body. Then, he was filled with anger and roared again, "Why didn't you send me a letter earlier for such important information?" Javier said aggrievedly, "Lord, I also wanted to send you a letter, but since then, Silvermoon City has been under martial law. The entire city is only allowed to enter and not to leave. Not to mention people, even a messenger pigeon can't fly out. How could I inform you?" Viscount Finn's face twitched a few times. In the end, he threw Javier to the ground. Then, he still felt that he had not vented his anger, so he kicked him a few more times. Javier howled exaggeratedly a few times, then shrank to the side and pretended to be invisible. Viscount Finn paced anxiously in the room. After a moment, he suddenly stopped and asked again, "Where's the palace doctor? Where is he now? I want to see him." What happened to him? He's gone? Viscount Finn rushed over angrily. Just as he was about to beat Javier up again, he saw the butler rushing over and helping him out. "Lord Viscounts, a Silvermoon Guard is outside and wants to see you. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.